The call that changed everything. It was just another regular Tuesday, the kind where the hours crawl slower than a snail uphill. I was in my office, sipping lukewarm coffee that tasted like burnt cardboard. I was glued to a spreadsheet I had already reviewed 3 times. The hum of the ceiling fan above buzzed like a lazy fly, and my inbox blinked with unopened messages I wasn't ready to face. That's when my phone buzzed on the desk. A name popped up that made me blink. Malik. My brother and I weren't exactly the kind who called just to catch up. He lived out in Hawaii, running one of those jaw-droppingly expensive resorts tourists fly thousands of miles to photograph. Our conversations were rare, usually reserved for birthdays and the occasional holiday check-in. So a random call from him in the middle of the day? It wasn't normal. I picked up, already expecting something odd. "Hey, little bro," he said, casual as always. "What's up, Malik?" I leaned back in my chair, waiting. There was a pause. "Quick question. Where's your wife?" I blinked. "She's on a business trip," I answered slowly. "In New York. She left Sunday." "Why?" Another pause, longer this time. "You sure about that?" Something in his voice shifted. No longer casual. "Not joking." "Why do you ask?" I said, my voice tightening. "Because," he sighed, "I'm standing in the lobby of the resort right now. And I swear on Mom's good name, your wife is right in front of me. She just checked in. With another man." The room fell silent. I thought I misheard him. "What?" "She's here," Malik said again, lowering his voice. "Barefoot in a sundress. With a guy who looks like he belongs on a cologne ad. And she just paid for the honeymoon suite using your ATM card." I didn't breathe for a moment. My hand froze on the mouse. The coffee suddenly tasted like sand in my mouth. I stared at the monitor, but the spreadsheet no longer made sense. My ears rang. My jaw clenched. But somehow, I kept my voice steady. "Are you sure it's her?" "Positive," he replied. I waved at her. She waved back. The silence stretched again. I rubbed my temple, trying to push away the pounding headache that had just formed behind my eyes. "All right," I said slowly. "Don't say anything else to her. Don't let her know you told me." "You got it," Malik said. "What do you want me to do?" I didn't answer right away. My heart was racing, but my mind was already shifting into something colder. I stood from my desk and walked to the window, watching the wind rustle the trees outside. My thoughts were a storm. Brielle, my wife of 6 years. I met her at a work seminar back when we were still nobodies. She was electric, sharp, confident, the kind of woman who didn't wait for doors to open. She kicked them down. We got along instantly. I paid for her last semester of grad school when her loan got denied. Supported her while she built her startup from scratch. Celebrated her wins like they were my own. And now, she was thousands of miles away, wrapped around another man on a beach, smiling like none of that mattered. I ended the call with Malik after a few more instructions, and I sat down heavily in my chair. I opened our banking app. The transaction history stared back at me like an accusation. $850, Ocean View room. $170, champagne brunch. $265, luxury couples massage. $320, catamaran sunset cruise. $2,430, total stolen joy. Each charge was a stab to the chest. Paid with my card. For the past few months, I'd felt something was off. She had started canceling date nights. Always tired. Overwhelmed at work. She'd pull away when I reached out. Dodge conversations with vague excuses. I chalked it up to stress. I didn't press. I gave her space. Turns out, I gave her room to cheat. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I wanted to throw something across the room, but I didn't. Instead, I just sat there. Quiet. Numb. Processing. Because in that moment, I realized something dangerous. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to get even. I wasn't going to burst into Hawaii demanding answers. I wasn't going to storm into her hotel suite and punch the guy in the face. That's what she'd expect. That's what she'd prepare for. But me? I was going to sit down. Think. Plan. By the time she realized what was happening, she wouldn't even know what hit her. I picked up the phone again. Called Malik back. "Keep watching," I said. "Tell me everything. And send photos if you can without getting caught." He agreed. He always liked a little drama, and for once, we were on the same team. Then I called my assistant and said I wouldn't be in the office the rest of the week. I closed my laptop. I poured a glass of whiskey, sat on the couch, and stared at our wedding photo above the fireplace. I remembered the way she smiled that day, the vows she made, how her voice cracked when she said forever. I should have known then. Some people say forever, but they mean until the next shiny thing comes along. I clinked the glass against my teeth. She thought I was a fool, that I'd never find out. But she forgot who I am. She forgot that I pay attention, that I see patterns, that I built my life on structure and precision. She played a careless game in paradise. And now? Now, I was about to show her that betrayal has consequences. And Hawaii was about to become the last place she'd ever forget. Paradise exposed. The funny thing about betrayal is how it doesn't hit you all at once. It seeps in like cold water under a door, slow at first, then soaking everything before you realize you're standing in a flood. That night, I sat in my living room with the lights off, letting it all soak in. The only sound was the clink of ice against glass and the slow creak of the ceiling fan above. I stared at the bank statements again, scrolling through the damage like it was a crime scene report. A couple spa package. Sunset cruise. Room service that could feed a football team. My name on every receipt. My money funding their fantasy. She had taken what we built and used it as a getaway fund for a fling. But I wasn't going to act rash. Not yet. Instead, I called Malik again. Describe him to me, I said, pouring another drink. He chuckled, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. Tall. Model-looking. You know the type. Skinny jeans and loafers on a beach, like he's allergic to sand. She kissed him on the cheek earlier. Held his hand. They looked too comfortable to be coworkers. I closed my eyes. He wasn't wrong. I already knew in my gut it wasn't business. Her emails had become vague lately. No more, be back Wednesday, or client meeting at 3. Just one-word replies or ghost-like silence. I told myself she was stressed, that she needed space. I gave her that, and she took it all the way to Hawaii. Thanks, man, I said. Keep an eye on her. Don't let her know you've said anything. Already on it, Malik replied. She booked the stay under your full name, by the way. No shame at all. Of course she did. After we hung up, I sat in silence for a while. I thought about everything. The way she used to wait up for me when I worked late. The way she used to laugh at my terrible jokes. Somewhere along the line, that laughter had faded, and I didn't know when it happened. Or maybe I just didn't want to notice. The idea of confronting her right then burned through my chest like acid. I imagined flying down to Hawaii, bursting into their suite, catching them red-handed. But then I pictured her reaction. She'd probably gasp, cry, beg, deny, maybe even twist the narrative and say I invaded her privacy. Turn it into a story about how I didn't trust her. The victim would become the villain. No, I needed her to be exposed. But not just to me, to everyone. That meant no yelling, no throwing things, no drama, just facts. I pulled up my shared folder from our bank. Every transaction lit up like a breadcrumb trail. I made a new spreadsheet because I needed this to be organized. Cold. Surgical. I labeled each entry by date, location, description, and amount. It wasn't hard to tell what was hers. She loved extravagant little things. Candlelit dinners. Imported wine. Spa facials with names that sounded like they belonged in science fiction movies. And the worst part? It was all billed from my side of the account. I felt like a ghost watching my life from outside. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen island, lit only by the fridge light, drafting a plan. I wasn't going to let her leave Hawaii with a tan and a smile. She'd arrive with betrayal and return with a legal storm. The next morning, I texted Malik, "Can you stall her tomorrow morning? Tell her she's been upgraded or some VIP beach experience. Just buy me time." He replied a few seconds later, "Easy. Consider it done. You cooking something up?" "Yeah," I texted. "I'm done being quiet." Then I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Joan. She and I went to college together, and she was the kind of person who could hack into a vending machine and get it to give free snacks for a week. Now, she was a cybersecurity consultant for a law firm and freelanced on the side. When I explained what I needed, she didn't even flinch. "I'll send you a tracker that links to a live purchase log," she said. "Give me access to the joint account, and I'll feed everything into a private sheet. Can you match it to GPS locations?" I asked. She laughed. "You want time, place, and context? You got it. I'll have it by tonight." "Thanks, Joan. I'll make it worth your time." "You already have," she said. "I love a good revenge story." I hung up, and for the first time in hours, I smiled. Because now it wasn't just about the heartbreak. It was about reclaiming control. I texted Malik again, "Send me a picture." Just one. An hour later, a photo came through. The two of them standing near the beach bar. She was holding a coconut drink with a pink umbrella. Her hair was down, those expensive sunglasses perched on her head, and her hand, resting gently on his chest. I zoomed in. No guilt, no shame, just smiles. That's when something inside me snapped into place. The man I had been, trusting, loyal, maybe a little too forgiving. He was gone. The man who stood in his place? He was calculating, focused. I saved the photo and added it to a folder on my laptop labeled Paradise Files. Next, I started gathering copies of all her recent emails and texts. She'd sent the travel confirmation from her work address to his personal one and carelessly CC'd herself. I pulled every digital receipt, every itinerary, every piece of proof. Then I called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. I needed someone licensed in Hawaii. Malik gave me a name, Tony. Civil attorney, sharp as glass, known for taking down big players with nothing but a folder and a raised eyebrow. I emailed her my evidence. 30 minutes later, we were on a Zoom call. I don't just want a divorce, I told her. I want a financial claim. Fraudulent use of funds. And I want her served while she's still in Hawaii. Tony raised an eyebrow. You're not messing around. Not anymore, I said. She nodded. Send everything. I'll draft a claim. When do you land? I hesitated. I haven't booked the flight yet. Well, she smiled. You'd better hurry. Paradise doesn't stay quiet forever. And with that, I closed the laptop, leaned back, and looked at the photo one more time. Brielle thought she was living her best life. But she had no idea I was about to turn her paradise into a courtroom. I wasn't just exposing her. I was preparing to bury the fantasy, publicly, legally, and with precision. And I would be watching every moment of it unfold. My brother, my ally. Growing up, Malik and I were never exactly best friends. We were just two boys under one roof, with different minds and different paths. He liked beaches and breezes. I liked books and balance sheets. While I stayed on the mainland, building a quiet life, he went off to Hawaii and turned a crumbling beachfront property into a luxury resort that made headlines. We didn't fight, but we didn't bond either. At least not until now. Betrayal has a strange way of rearranging loyalties. It was 2 days after Malik's call. I was sitting in my car, parked at the edge of a cliffside overlook just outside the city. The kind of place where you go to think, or maybe to scream when no one's around. I had the ocean in the distance, cold, gray, unforgiving, and my phone glowing in my palm. All right, Malik said on the other end. Here's what I got. He had gone full investigator on my behalf. The kind of effort you only make when blood actually means something. Reservation details are all under your name, he began. She booked the honeymoon suite for 6 nights. Confirmed through your shared bank card. All-inclusive. Champagne welcome. Turn-down service. Ocean view. I closed my eyes. Send me the documents. Already in your inbox, he said. And I've pulled security footage too. Discreet angles. Nothing invasive, but enough to show they're not just coworkers. You sure? I asked, jaw tight. Trust me, he said flatly. She's not talking business. They're kissing by the pool bar. Arms around each other. I even saw them dancing last night at the luau. A knot twisted in my stomach. She ever say anything to you? I asked, wondering if she tried to lie to his face. Nope. Just smiled like everything was fine. Didn't even flinch when I greeted her. She said she was just taking a break from work stress. I didn't let on. Good. And him? I asked. What's his story? Malik exhaled through the speaker. Name's Levi. I asked a few staff members to poke around. Turns out he's some kind of marketing manager at a firm in California. Mid-30s. Works out a lot. Acts like he's God's gift to women. Perfect, I muttered. The cliché of clichés. You want me to do more digging? No, I said. I've got someone else helping on that front. Because I did. Joan. She'd already sent me a Google sheet, color-coded, organized, time-stamped, with every purchase Brielle made using our joint account since she landed. Even GPS coordinates were included, pinged from the stores and restaurants she visited. It read like a travel brochure from hell, and every entry had my name on it. My next move was to tighten the circle. I needed more than emotional damage. I needed legal ground. So I called Joan again. Hey, she said, picking up on the second ring. Your sheet's updated. You should take a look at row 35. I opened it. Item, boutique jewelry set. Amount, $860. Note, gift wrapped, signed to My Future, handwriting confirmed to match Brielle. My hands tightened around the phone. She used my card to buy him a gift? Joan didn't answer. She didn't have to. Keep tracking, I said. I want every dollar mapped out. I want a full timeline. I want to know what they touched, where they stayed, what they wore. You're getting dangerous, she said, half amused, half impressed. No, I replied. I'm getting smart. After hanging up, I contacted Tony, the civil attorney Malik had recommended. She was sharp, fast, and completely unbothered by the scale of the drama. I've reviewed the files you sent, she said during our second call. I can easily build a claim here. Fraudulent use of joint funds, emotional distress, misrepresentation. If you want to press charges or serve her papers while she's still on the island, I can help you file the paperwork within 48 hours. Make it happen. Just be aware, she said carefully, this could go public. I don't care. That night, Malik emailed me the video clips. The first one started with soft music playing in the background, one of the resort's live bands. The camera angle showed Brielle and Levi swaying together under string lights, his hands on her waist. She leaned in, whispered something in his ear. He laughed, and then she kissed him, right there, on the dance floor. The same floor where I once danced with her during a retreat Malik hosted 3 years ago. Back when she still reached for my hand in public. Back when she still looked at me like I mattered. I closed the video, not out of pain, but out of certainty. I was done being blindsided. This was no longer about heartbreak. It was business. She turned our marriage into a transaction. So I would treat the fallout like a contract gone wrong. Anything else you need? Malik asked when I called to check in again. I need access to her suite, I said. Not to break in. Just gather intel. He hesitated. That's a gray area. She left the door open when she used my name and my card. I have a right to know what's happening under my account. I might have a guy, he said slowly. His name's Kai. Been with me 6 years. Discreet. Loyal. I trust him. Send him in. Quietly. Don't take anything. Just eyes. You got it. As the plan started to take shape, I began drafting a master document. I titled it Operation Island Exit. It included bank statements, email screenshots, timeline of lies, photos and videos from Malik, spreadsheet from Joan, drafted legal complaint from Tony. All of it stacked neatly into a folder I kept on an encrypted drive. The evidence was clear. The betrayal was proven. But still, I hadn't called her. She had no idea what was coming. That silence? It was my favorite part. Because there's something powerful about letting someone walk deeper into the fire, believing they're in the sun. They sip champagne, post beach photos, smile in the mirror. And all the while, the ground beneath them is starting to crack. By the end of the week, it wouldn't be a beach beneath her feet. It would be a courtroom. The setup. There's something deeply satisfying about watching a liar smile while walking straight into a trap. And in this case, the trap came with ocean views and complimentary mimosas. I landed in Honolulu just before noon on a Friday, stepping off the plane with a single carry-on, dark sunglasses, and a name that wasn't mine. I booked my hotel under an alias, Mr. Hayes, a name I used once for an old fantasy football league. It felt ironic now. That identity, unlike my marriage, was still intact. I didn't stay at Malik's resort. That would have been reckless. Instead, I checked into a boutique hotel just a few blocks away, one of those eco-luxury places where no one asks questions as long as you tip well and look tired. I kept to myself. No loud calls. No public scenes. Just observation, coordination, and silence. Malik met me later that evening at a small cafe near the marina. He wore flip-flops and a linen shirt, blending in with the tourists. Me? I still hadn't changed out of my travel clothes. I wasn't here to relax. She's still playing the perfect guest, Malik said, sipping his drink. She booked a couple's kayak tour for tomorrow morning. With him? I asked. He nodded. And they added a spa session for 2 in the afternoon. She's using the card like it prints money. She doesn't suspect a thing? Not a hint. She's floating. I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the docked boats. The setting sun bounced off the water like liquid fire. It should have been romantic. Instead, it felt like a countdown. All right, I said. Let's move forward. Introduce me to your attorney friend. The next morning, Malik set up a quiet meeting with Tony Rivera, a civil attorney whose office overlooked the edge of Diamond Head. She greeted me with a firm handshake and a confidence that made it clear she didn't lose often. I've reviewed the documentation, she said, gesturing to the thick folder I'd provided. You've got solid grounds: financial misconduct, fraudulent use of joint funds, and emotional distress. More importantly, We can file here, But if you wanted to hit harder, we wait until she's mid-trip. Let her think everything's perfect, then drop the hammer. I nodded. Make her feel untouchable. Then remind her she's not. Tony smiled. My kind of client. That afternoon, I returned to my hotel and reviewed the latest batch of updates from Joan. The spreadsheet had grown. More dinners, jewelry, a private snorkel tour. One transaction labeled Lover's Cove Picnic Basket Premium. That one stung. Not because of the money, but because we'd done that same picnic 2 years ago. It had been her idea then. Now, it was recycled romance for someone else. I closed the laptop and called Malik. Time for the next phase, I said. Card switch, he asked. Yes. Can Kai handle it? Kai was Malik's right-hand man. Quiet, unshakable, the kind of guy you could trust to carry secrets to the grave. Malik once said Kai had fixed a blackout during a hurricane with duct tape and a screwdriver. I'll brief him tonight, Malik replied. We'll do it tomorrow morning when she comes down for breakfast. Tell him to be fast. Clean. No errors. The plan was simple. Malik would stage a billing issue at the front desk that required Brielle's physical presence. Something like a hold error on the room. While she was down arguing, Kai would enter the suite, swap her real ATM card with an identical dummy, and leave everything else untouched. When she tried to use it later that day, nothing would work. Her picture-perfect vacation would collapse by degrees, each swipe a reminder that control was slipping. By the time the sun rose, everything was in motion. Malik called me around 10 a.m. She's at the desk now, he whispered, giving my staff the fake smile. Is Kai in? Already in and out. Like a ghost. I grinned. Perfect. Later that afternoon, Joan messaged me. No activity on the real card since 10:13 a.m. Looks like the decoy's in full effect. That was the moment I finally felt the shift. The balance tipping. I imagined her standing at the register of some boutique shop, sunglasses in one hand, disappointment curling her lips as the cashier shook their head. Card declined. Swipe again. Declined. Confusion. Embarrassment. Panic. Malik confirmed it. They went to the jewelry store in Waikiki, he said. She tried to buy a gold chain. Got declined. Tried again. Nothing. Levi looked confused. She looked pissed. And now, they're back at the resort. She's on the phone with someone. Probably the bank. Or maybe you. I chuckled. Let her call. I didn't answer, of course. I wasn't ready yet. She had to sit in it longer. But I wasn't done. I crafted a short message on a white piece of paper and sealed it in an envelope. Then I printed one of the clearest screenshots of her kissing Levi on the beach and added it inside. On the paper, I wrote just one line. Smile. You're not on vacation anymore. I handed it to Malik in the lobby that evening. Deliver this to her tomorrow morning. Hand it to her personally. Say it's from a private guest. Then walk away. He turned the envelope over in his hand. She's gonna lose it. That's the point. That night, I returned to my quiet hotel room. I stood by the window, watching the ocean crash against the rocks, and thought about the man I had been just 1 week ago. Blind, tired, trying to fix something that was already broken. Now, I wasn't trying to fix anything. I was just making sure the wreckage had my signature on it. The next morning, Malik called me with a chuckle in his voice. She opened it in the breakfast lounge, he said. Went pale like someone kicked the chair out from under her. Levi asked what it was. She told him it was nothing. Then she stormed off to her suite. I smiled, staring at the rising sun outside my window. Good. She's gonna blow soon, Malik added. She already did, I said calmly. She just doesn't know it yet. I ended the call, finished my coffee, and zipped up my suitcase. It was time to go home, not because I was finished, but because the real show was about to begin. And she still had no idea the cameras were rolling. The card switch. There's a specific kind of silence that follows a perfect setup. It's not empty, it's loaded. Like the air right before a storm breaks, or the hush that settles in a courtroom when the verdict is about to be read. That's the silence I sat in the morning after Malik delivered the envelope. A thick, waiting kind of silence. I didn't rush it. I let the clock do the work. At exactly 11:03 a.m., the first call came through. Brielle. I watched her name flash across my screen. I didn't move. Let it ring. Then another. Then another. I muted the phone and slid it face down across the counter. My hands were steady, my breathing calm. I'd imagined this part for days, the unraveling. But nothing compared to the real-time thrill of watching her world sink slowly beneath her feet. She called 6 more times over the next 2 hours. I didn't pick up. Meanwhile, Joan kept feeding me live updates from the card tracker. Or rather, the lack of them. Declined again. She messaged at 12:12 p.m., this time at a beachside cafe. She tried 3 times. The beautiful thing about revenge done right is that it's not loud. It doesn't slam doors or scream accusations. It whispers truth into places where lies used to live. That's what this card switch was. Not revenge in the classic sense, but revelation. One swipe at a time. Malik texted me mid-afternoon. She's asking everyone at the front desk why her card isn't working. She thinks it's a hotel error. Let her. I replied. I imagined her standing there in that overpriced sundress, trying to smile while confusion bloomed across her face. Levi probably standing nearby, arms crossed, wondering what she was hiding. I wondered if he knew the room they were staying in was booked under my name. If you noticed that every time she signed a receipt, it was with a last name she swore she wasn't proud of anymore. But the best was yet to come. I had prepared a second envelope, this one heavier, thicker, stuffed with truth. Inside, I had placed a printed bank statement with every line highlighted that matched their trip, a spreadsheet compiled by Joan, organized by date, location, and cost, the resort's room booking confirmation bearing my full name, a divorce petition drafted by Tony, and finally, a neatly labeled USB drive. That USB? It contained the video footage Malik had collected. Their slow dances, hand-holding, laughing under tiki lights, the kiss by the bar, all time-stamped, all in high resolution. This wasn't just evidence, it was a story. A timeline of betrayal wrapped in facts. And it was about to land directly in her hands. I made one last call to Malik that evening. You sure about this? He asked, though his voice already held the answer. She took a vacation on my dime, I said. She can handle a wake-up call. The next morning, Malik approached her in the hotel lobby, same as before. Mrs. Thorne, he said. I laughed when he told me later she didn't correct him. She was so used to pretending, she forgot to drop the act. This was left for you by a guest, he added, handing her the envelope. She took it without question. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number this time. I didn't answer. Then Malik called. She opened it in the suite, he said. I couldn't see her, but one of the cleaning staff said she threw something against the wall. Then she started shouting. Levi. He left the room 10 minutes later. Looked like someone had slapped him in the face. Did she chase after him? Nope. She slammed the door. He walked down to the pool bar alone. Asked for tequila at 10 a.m. That was almost poetic. I could picture him standing there in his beach shirt, staring out at the waves, suddenly realizing he was just a prop in someone else's mess. That everything she promised him, freedom, love, adventure, was built on stolen money and borrowed names. Later that evening, I got a call from Tony. She's officially been served, she said. Divorce petition, financial claim, and all supporting evidence. We have documentation of receipt. She knows she's been caught. And the lawsuit? Filed. We'll follow up once she returns to the mainland. But based on the footage and your bank records, the case is solid. I thanked her and hung up. That night, I didn't celebrate. I didn't toast a victory or call friends to brag. I just stood on the balcony of my hotel room, watching the tide roll in, listening to the soft hush of the waves meeting sand. I thought about everything. 6 years of marriage. Countless sacrifices. Quiet nights where I stayed up late finishing her pitch decks. The way she used to rest her head on my shoulder when she couldn't sleep. The little things that build a life. And how, one by one, she tore them down for a man who couldn't even pay for his own cocktails. Somewhere down there, in another hotel suite, she was pacing, panicking, scrambling to call banks, lawyers, anyone who would listen. But the truth? No one could help her now. She betrayed the one person who actually would have stood by her. She mistook kindness for weakness. And when she decided to treat our marriage like a game, she forgot one important thing. I never lose when I know the rules. And now? I was the one writing them. By the next morning, she had checked out. Malik texted me. She left in a rush. Didn't speak to anyone. Levi's gone too. Good, I replied. I boarded my return flight that afternoon. No first class. No upgrades. I didn't need luxury. I had peace. And sometimes, that's more valuable than anything money can buy. I sat by the window, watching the clouds shift outside, feeling lighter than I had in months. There were still battles ahead, court dates, settlements, a property division. But the hardest part was over. She'd seen the truth. She'd tasted what it felt like to be powerless. And she'd know, forever, that the man she tried to deceive wasn't the fool she thought he was. He was the one with the final move. The panic call. It was 5:41 a.m. when my phone rang again. I had just returned home the night before, dropped my bag by the door, and walked straight to the shower without turning on a single light. I needed to rinse off Hawaii. Rinse off the smell of betrayal, the lingering sin of ocean wind and lies. I hadn't even unpacked. The suitcase set untouched by the bedroom wall, and my phone, on silent, buzzed to life on the nightstand. The screen lit up. Brielle. I let it ring. Then again. And again. She called 9 times in less than 20 minutes before I finally picked up. I didn't say a word at first. I just let the weight of the silence reach her through the line. "Hello," she said, voice small. I stayed quiet. "Where are you?" she asked, sounding like she hadn't slept. I finally spoke, my voice calm, even. "Back home." There was a pause on her end. I could hear background noise, doors closing, maybe footsteps. She was probably pacing. You're home," she repeated. "Why? What's going on?" I could almost hear her trying to piece it together, but nothing she'd prepared would have fit what she was walking into. "Why is my card not working?" she demanded, her voice rising with desperation. "Why did it get declined at every store yesterday? I called the bank, and they said there was a freeze on it. Did you do something? Did I do something?" I repeated slowly. "That's Rich. Listen," she began quickly, "this whole thing. I know how it looks, but it's not." "Don't," I interrupted. She went quiet. I stood at the window of my house, looking out at the neighborhood just beginning to stir. Sprinklers ticked on across lawns. Early joggers passed by with earbuds in, completely unaware that on this call, a marriage was being dissected piece by piece. "You told me you were in New York," I said plainly. "You packed a suitcase and kissed me goodbye and said you were meeting a client uptown." "I was," she lied. "You weren't," I said. "You were in Hawaii. At my brother's resort. With another man." I heard her inhale sharply. "And you used my card," I continued, my voice still low, still cold. "Every cocktail, every massage, every dinner, every room service bill, you swiped with my name. You made reservations in my name. You laid in bed with another man, in a suite I paid for." "Wait," she said, stumbling over her words. It's not like that. Don't lie again, Brielle. I wasn't trying to hurt you," she snapped, desperation cracking her voice now. "It was a mistake. It just happened. You planned the trip. There was silence. You bought the tickets. You forwarded the itinerary to him. You used my funds to do it. That's not a mistake, Brielle. That's a choice." I let that hang in the air. She didn't respond. "You don't understand," she finally whispered. "I've been feeling lost, alone. You've been distant. You've been working so much." "No," I cut in. "Don't do that. Don't blame my job. Don't act like loneliness is a permission slip for betrayal. You could have talked to me. You could have told me something wasn't right. Instead, you packed a bag, smiled in my face, and flew to paradise to play house with someone else." There was no defense. She knew it. Her voice broke. "Please. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to go this far. It just got complicated. I was confused. You weren't confused when you booked a luxury suite. You weren't confused when you bought him a necklace with my card." She gasped. How do you know that?" "I know everything," I said. "Every charge, every location, every video, every lie." She was completely silent now. "You really thought you'd get away with it?" I asked. "You thought I'd sit here while you dipped into our account and took a vacation with someone else?" She stammered. "I needed something different. I didn't plan on hurting you. I swear. I still love you." I almost laughed. "No, Brielle," I said. "You love what I gave you. The stability, the money, the image. You loved the version of me that didn't know what you were doing." She cried then, quietly. I didn't interrupt. I didn't comfort. "I don't know what to do," she said between sobs. I made a mistake. "You'll get a package by 9 a.m., I said calmly. "What?" "In your suite. Courtesy of the hotel manager. Open it. Read everything inside. Then pack your things and check out. You'll be flying home alone." She sniffled. "What's in it?" "Reality," I said. "Something you've been avoiding." "I can fix this," she pleaded. "Please. I know I hurt you, but I'll do anything. Just tell me how to make this right." "You can't," I said. "This isn't about hurt anymore. It's about who you chose to be when you thought I wasn't watching." "But I didn't mean to fall for him," she whispered. And there it was. The truth. I didn't even flinch. "Brielle," I said slowly. You chose him. You booked the flight. You packed the bags. You shared the bed. You used my card to fund the fantasy. That's not something that just happens. That's effort. That's intention. Silence. And then the smallest voice I had ever heard from her. I'm scared. You should be. The line was quiet for a long time. I could hear her breathing. Maybe she thought I'd soften. Maybe she thought I'd say, come home, or we'll figure this out. But I'd figured it out already, and she no longer had a place in it. I have to go, I said. Wait. But I hung up. I stood in the quiet of the house for a long while after that. The walls felt a little wider. The air, a little clearer. Like the house had been holding its breath too, and now it was free to exhale. I went downstairs, brewed a fresh cup of coffee, and took it out onto the porch. The sky was turning gold. Birds chirped in the trees. For the first time in a long time, I felt still. No more guessing. No more wondering. Just truth. I didn't need to yell or scream to win. All I had to do was stop pretending she was someone she never intended to be. And soon, when she opened that package, she'd realize just how much pretending had cost her. The envelope of consequences. The sun rose in Honolulu like it always did, calm, golden, promising. But for Brielle, this morning was going to be different. I imagined her waking up in the luxury suite, the ocean breeze slipping through the curtains, the faint sound of waves in the distance. For a moment, maybe she even forgot everything. Maybe she reached for Levi. Maybe she still hoped this was just a bad dream. But dreams don't come with documents. At exactly 9 a.m., Malik followed through on our agreement. He walked up to the suite, knocked twice, and handed her a second envelope, this one thicker than the last. He didn't say a word, just smiled politely, turned around, and walked away. Inside that envelope was the end of everything she thought she had control over. The divorce petition was printed on crisp, white paper with bold lettering and Tony's law firm's insignia at the top. It detailed every violation of trust, every financial abuse, every legal reason I had for terminating the marriage. No fluff, just facts. Alongside that, I had included a formal restraining order against her access to all joint accounts, investments, and property titles. Tony's team had frozen everything. The house, the cars, the business assets. Brielle now had no access to anything we had built together. Also included was a breakdown, a full spreadsheet, color-coded, labeled, with every single dollar she had spent using my name. There were receipts from the resort, restaurants, designer stores, and even gas stations. Each row was a nail in the coffin. Joan had done an exceptional job organizing it all, and it looked less like a document and more like a prosecution case file. But what truly mattered, the thing that would take her breath away, was the final item in the envelope. A small black USB drive, neatly labeled. Inside that USB was the footage. For separate clips, each captured with date and timestamps from Malik's security system. There was no ambiguity, no grainy, low-resolution blur to dispute. The kiss under the tiki lights, the hand on her thigh at the poolside lounge, the giggling as she leaned on Levi during the luau, the way she leaned into his neck as they walked back to the suite at night. It was all there. And he, Levi, was just as exposed. That's the part she hadn't thought through. He worked for a firm in San Diego. Brielle once told me it was conservative, uptight, known for firing employees over office romances and inappropriate social behavior. She never thought I'd find out. Never thought Malik would track the footage. Never imagined I'd take it this far. But I had. Because love wasn't the point anymore. Dignity was. I got a call from Malik about 30 minutes after he delivered the envelope. "You're not going to believe what just happened," he said, half laughing. "Try me," I replied. She came down to the lobby in a fury, holding the envelope like it had bitten her. Demanded to speak to management. Then she demanded to speak to me. And I asked. "I met her outside the main doors," he said. "She started yelling, asking if I was working with you. She said it was invasion of privacy." I let her talk. Smart. Then Levi came out. He looked shaken. I think he saw the video. I leaned back in my chair. "He knows." "Oh, yeah." His face said it all. He wasn't furious. He was terrified. Probably realized the kind of fallout he's about to walk into. Good. They argued right there, in front of everyone, Malik said. She said something about fixing it. He said something about lawyers. Then he just walked off. Didn't even wait for her. That part didn't surprise. She had traded 6 years of real for 6 days of illusion. And now she was left holding an envelope full of truths and a name no one wanted to be associated with. Later that day, I received an email from Tony's assistant. Everything had been filed. The claims were active. The documents had been notarized and verified. I now had legal separation pending trial and a strong financial misconduct case. And the startup I helped Brielle launch? I had already removed her from the accounts. Back when we set up the LLC, she didn't pay attention to the fine print. I had retained majority control with 60% equity, standard protection in case she ever wanted to sell early. I never thought I'd use it this way, but now it felt like insurance. I sent a notice of removal to her business email that evening. Effective immediately, she was out. No longer CEO, no longer partner, no longer tied to anything I built. The final blow came when Malik told me Levi's company had received a forwarded copy of the video. Not by me, of course not, but someone anonymous, someone who simply labeled the email, thought your HR department might want to see this. I didn't have to ask who sent it. Joan. She always did have a flair for timing. By that night, the fallout was in full swing. I stayed up reading a book I'd been trying to finish for months. Something about quiet resilience and rebuilding after a storm. Funny how I understood it better now. My phone buzzed once more. A text from an unknown number. Please. Can we talk? Just once. Please. I didn't respond. Because what was there left to say? She had poured gasoline on our life and lit the match, thinking I wouldn't notice the smoke. But now, she was choking on the fumes. She had lied to my face, spent my money, kissed another man under my brother's roof, and thought all she had to do was cry her way out of it. Not this time. I walked out onto the balcony, breathing in the cool night air, letting it settle in my lungs. There was no need for revenge anymore. I'd already won. Not through rage. Not through violence. Through evidence. Through calm. Through the truth. Let people call me cold. Let them say I overreacted. Because in the end, she tried to write me out of the story we built together. But I held the pen, and she just got edited out, grounded and exposed. When I stepped off the plane back home, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel angry either. What I felt, oddly enough, was quiet. A kind of stillness that settled in my chest like dust after a storm. I wasn't coming home from a war. I was coming home from a revelation. And the man who had left just a week ago wasn't the same man walking into this house now. I took my time walking through the front door. Everything was exactly as I left it. The shoes neatly by the door. The vase with dried lavender still sitting untouched on the dining table. But the energy had changed. It was no longer our house. It was mine. Completely, irrevocably mine. Before I even unpacked, I did what needed to be done. First, I changed the locks. A locksmith came within the hour. I didn't explain why. I didn't need to. The man simply did the job, took the payment, and nodded before leaving me standing with a brand new set of keys and a fresh bolt on the past. Next, I contacted my bank and finalized the financial separation. Our joint accounts were already frozen, thanks to Tony, but now I made it permanent. No more access. No more loopholes. Every dime was accounted for, every transaction traced. I wasn't just protecting myself, I was securing peace. Then I cleared the house. Not of furniture or memories, just of her. Everything that belonged to Brielle, her clothes, shoes, makeup, books, favorite mugs, even her yoga mat, I boxed up and stored in the garage. I didn't throw anything out. That would have been too easy. Instead, I put it all neatly into labeled bins, and I left a simple note on top. Collected. Categorized. Claimed. You can coordinate pickup through your attorney. I didn't need her setting foot back inside. She had already stomped enough mud through the floorboards of my trust. 3 days later, the doorbell rang. It was a courier with a stack of papers, signed responses from her legal team. She wasn't fighting the divorce. Not directly. Not yet. But the tone of the reply was careful, curated, designed to slow things down. Too late for that. The next morning, she flew back. Alone. Malik had texted me the moment she checked out. She's leaving today. First class. No Levi. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. But I knew the storm was about to move from Hawaii to here. Sure enough, by mid-afternoon, there she was, standing at the front door like someone who forgot they no longer lived here. She had sunglasses on, her hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, and that same duffel bag she'd taken to Hawaii slung over her shoulder like nothing had changed. She rang the bell twice. I watched her from the upstairs hallway monitor. I didn't rush. I let her stand there. Let her feel the weight of waiting. Then I pressed the intercom button. Brielle. She looked around, confused. Can you open the door? This property is no longer shared, I said evenly. You'll receive further instructions through your attorney. Her face changed immediately. Wait, what? Are you serious right now? I flew back to fix this. You flew back alone, I said. That was your first clue. She stepped closer to the door. Please, just let me in. We can talk. There's nothing to talk about. Come on, you don't mean that. You said you needed space. You took it. In Hawaii. With another man. That was a mistake. No, I interrupted. It was a pattern. I paused. You broke this, Brielle. Not just once. Not just with one kiss. You made a decision every single day of that trip. And now, you're facing the cost. She was visibly shaking. People make mistakes. People do, I agreed. But not everyone betrays the person who gave them everything. The silence that followed was heavy. Then her voice cracked. The neighbors are staring. I looked down from the window. Sure enough, across the street, old Mrs. Callahan had paused mid-sprinkler. A man jogging with his dog slowed to glance over. Even the mailman took a second look before heading back to his van. I'm not the one who should be embarrassed, I said. You made this public the moment you tried to hide it. Her lips trembled. You really hate me now, don't you? No, I replied. Hate takes too much energy. And I'm done giving you mine. I ended the intercom call. She stood there for another 30 seconds. Then she walked to the curb, where her Uber was still waiting, and climbed in without looking back. That evening, her parents called. I debated whether to answer. But curiosity got the better of me. Hello, I said. There was a moment of hesitation. Hi, her mother said, her voice tightly wound. We heard about everything. We just wanted to hear your side. You want my side? Yes, her father added. Brielle's upset. She says it wasn't what it looked like. It never is, I said. Well? She went to Hawaii with another man. She used my bank card. She booked the suite under my name. She lied to all of us. If you're looking for someone to feel sorry for, I'm not him. There was a long silence. I'm sorry, her mother said finally. We didn't know. No, I replied. You just didn't ask. I hung up. I didn't owe them closure. Not when they'd spent 6 years turning a blind eye to the cracks she caused and calling them character. That night, I sat on the back patio with a glass of water and watched the sky turn orange. The same sky we used to sit under together, laughing at silly TV shows and dreaming about our future. Now, I sat under it alone, and for the first time, it didn't feel empty. It felt earned. The house was no longer filled with tension. No walking on eggshells. No late-night text I wasn't supposed to see. No phone calls that ended the second I stepped into the room. Just silence. And silence, when it's finally honest, is the loudest kind of peace. I walked back inside, past the row of labeled boxes in the garage, and shut the door behind me. She had returned home thinking she could fix it with words. But some bridges burned so clean, there's nothing left to walk across. The final confrontation. A month later, I stood in the hallway outside courtroom 4B, dressed in a charcoal gray suit, holding nothing but a leather folder and calm resolve. The hallway buzzed quietly, shuffling feet, muffled conversations, the occasional call for silence. But all of it faded to a dull murmur as I stood by the bench, waiting for her. Brielle arrived 5 minutes late. She looked nothing like the woman who had stepped onto a Hawaiian beach in a sundress and sunglasses. Today, she wore a navy skirt suit, her hair pulled tight into a bun, as heavy with something between regret and stubbornness. Beside her was a sharp-looking attorney with an expensive briefcase and the kind of practiced smirk that only existed in courtrooms and overpriced divorce settlements. She didn't make eye contact. I didn't care. My attorney, Tony, stood beside me with quiet confidence, flipping through documents like she already knew how this would end. When the clerk called our case, we entered the courtroom and sat across from each other at 2 separate tables. The judge was a middle-aged woman with a steel gaze and a reputation for disliking unnecessary drama. Exactly who I'd hoped for. Tony opened with a calm summary of the case: financial misconduct, betrayal of marital trust, fraudulent use of shared assets. She spoke clearly, backed by dates, receipts, bank statements, and video footage we'd submitted into sealed evidence. Brielle's lawyer tried to counter with emotional appeals. Your Honor, he said, my client acknowledges that mistakes were made. But this was not a calculated attempt to harm her husband. This was the result of emotional distance in the marriage. My client felt isolated, neglected, and alone. She acted irrationally, yes, but not maliciously. Brielle lowered her eyes, like the weight of those words was hard to carry. The judge didn't blink. Tony rose smoothly. Your Honor, feeling neglected doesn't justify using your spouse's identity and financial accounts to fund an adulterous vacation. My client has presented proof of premeditation, booking details, duplicate reservations, and video footage showing sustained romantic engagement with another man. This was not spontaneous. This was a pattern. The judge nodded, flipping through the documents. Then she turned to Brielle. Mrs. Thorne, do you deny traveling to Hawaii with another man using your husband's financial information? Brielle looked up, her voice barely audible. No, Your Honor. Do you deny that the room, the meals, and the gifts were charged to your husband's account without his consent? Again, no, Your Honor. Do you deny that during this trip, you portrayed yourself as unmarried on official travel documents submitted to the resort and tour companies? Her attorney tried to speak, but the judge raised a hand. I'd like to hear it from her. Brielle hesitated, then shook her head. I don't deny it. The judge nodded and leaned back in her chair. Thank you. Tony stood again and handed over the final exhibit, my written statement. The judge read it silently for a moment before placing it aside. Then it was my turn. Would you like to say anything? The judge asked. I stood, buttoned my jacket, and walked slowly to the witness platform. I didn't look at Brielle. Not once. My eyes stayed forward, my voice even. I was married for 6 years to a woman I thought I knew. I supported her through grad school, paid off her debts, helped launch her business. I built our life carefully, brick by brick. And one day, without warning, she took a sledgehammer to all of it and smiled like it was self-care. A few people in the gallery shifted. I continued. She planned a trip with another man. She lied to my face. She used our joint funds, my money, to finance a vacation she called a business trip. She bought jewelry for someone else while pretending to be someone else. She committed financial betrayal and emotional abandonment, all in one act. I paused. And when she got caught, she didn't apologize. She didn't come home and confess. She panicked because the fantasy fell apart. I finally turned my head slightly, just enough to glance at her. You had 6 years to make things work, I said softly. You chose a 5-day trip over a lifetime. I stepped back, nodded to the judge, and returned to my seat. The room was still. The judge adjusted her glasses, glanced at the stack of evidence once more, and gave her ruling. The court finds the evidence overwhelmingly in favor of the petitioner, she said firmly. The divorce is granted effective immediately. The house, bank assets, and startup business will be awarded to the petitioner in full. Additionally, the respondent will be required to repay $7,200 in misused funds, as documented. Brielle's lawyer tried to argue for reduced repayment. The judge cut him off. This is not a trial for emotional debate. The law is clear. Fraud has consequences. Brielle's shoulders sagged. She didn't speak. Outside the courtroom, I waited for a moment near the elevators. Not for her, but because Tony had stepped into the hall to take a call, and I needed to sign one last form. Brielle eventually approached. Alone. I glanced at her. She looked tired. Not the tired of missing sleep, but the tired that comes from carrying a story that finally collapsed. Can I say something? She asked. You just did. In court. She frowned. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I turned toward her fully. That's the problem, I said. You never meant for anything. You just let things happen, until you couldn't hide them anymore. I was confused, she said weakly. No, you were dishonest. I thought maybe after some time. There's no after, Brielle. She looked down, as if expecting that. Her voice was small again. Did you ever love me? I didn't flinch. I did. Completely. And you turned it into paperwork. Her eyes welled up, but I didn't comfort her. That time was gone. She opened her mouth to say something else, but I stepped past her as the elevator dinged. Tony returned, handed me the signed file, and we left. I didn't look back. That evening, I opened a bottle of wine and stood on my balcony again. The wind had picked up. The air had shifted. Somewhere down the road, Brielle would tell her version of the story. Maybe to friends. Maybe to someone new. Maybe even to herself. But I didn't care anymore. Because the story that mattered, the one with the truth, the proof, and the clean break, was finished. I had walked into court with facts and walked out with freedom. No screaming. No slamming doors. No dramatic exits. Just the quiet sound of closure. And the knowledge that I had rebuilt what she tried to tear down, with dignity intact. My life, rewritten. It's funny how peace doesn't come with fanfare. It It doesn't knock on your door with balloons or announce itself like a grand entrance. It comes quietly, softly, like a breeze drifting through an open window, reminding you that the storm is gone. That's how I felt waking up in my new apartment for the first time. The sun filtered through the blinds, casting golden stripes across the hardwood floor. My dog, yes, I finally got one, was curled up at the foot of the bed, snoring softly. He was a rescue, a stubborn little mutt named Milo who liked to hog the blankets and bark at his reflection in the mirror. Somehow, his presence made the space feel lived in, real. Like I wasn't just existing, I was healing. The apartment wasn't big. One bedroom, one office, open kitchen. But everything in it was mine. Every item I brought in had meaning. The framed photos on the shelf were of friends, travels, and family. No wedding pictures. No half-hearted smiles. Just me, in all the honest moments that never required performance. A few weeks after the court hearing, I officially moved out of the house Brielle and I once shared. I didn't fight to keep it, even though the judge had awarded it to me. I didn't want to live in a museum of broken memories. I sold it. Got a good offer, too. Young couple, newly married, excited to start their life together. I let them have it. Let them fill the space with hope instead of history. Brielle didn't contest the sale. She barely said anything after the ruling. And I got back to living. I started biking again on Sundays, the way I used to before I met her. Just me and the wind, riding along the river trails with no destination, no schedule. I found new coffee shops, met neighbors, took cooking classes on Thursday nights because, for the first time in years, I didn't have to worry about someone else's preferences. I didn't check her social media, didn't scroll through tagged photos, trying to see who she was with or what excuse she was giving the world. That chapter was closed. Reading it again wouldn't change the ending. Malik and I talk more now. The whole ordeal had brought us closer than years of birthdays and holidays ever did. We laughed about things now, small details that had once stung. You should have seen her face when the envelope landed, he'd said once over a call. Like someone handed her a live grenade. He came to visit a few weeks later. We grabbed dinner, sat on the rooftop of a local restaurant, and just talked. No tension, no rushed updates. Just two brothers who had been through something ugly and came out stronger for it. You're different, he said, sipping his beer. Better or worse? Better, he replied. You look lighter. Like you're finally breathing. I nodded. Feels that way too. Then there was Tony. What started as a purely professional connection had slowly grown into something I didn't expect. We stayed in touch after the case ended, initially about paperwork, then about life. One evening, we met for drinks at a quiet bar downtown. She looked different out of court, more relaxed, warmer. Her sharpness was still there, but it was softened by genuine curiosity. She asked how I was doing. Not in the way people do to be polite, but like she really wanted to know. I'm learning to be selfish again, I told her. She smiled. Good. You earned that. By the end of the night, I realized I hadn't thought about Brielle once. Not her lies. Not the videos. Not the voice that once convinced me she'd never hurt me. Just me and the woman sitting across from me, sipping wine and laughing without pretense. It didn't turn into something overnight. I didn't dive into a rebound or force myself into romance. I let it unfold the way healing should, slow, steady, respectful. Maybe it becomes something more. Maybe it doesn't. But for once, I was okay with the uncertainty. One Saturday morning, I visited the place I used to sit with Brielle on our good days and overlooked that faced the city skyline, tucked behind a quiet park. I sat alone on the bench, watching the wind carry leaves across the path. I thought about everything she took from me, and everything I took back. She took my trust. I reclaimed it through boundaries. She took my finances. I rebuilt with intention. She took my dignity. I answered her betrayal with grace, strategy, and silence. People often say that revenge is best served cold, but I disagree. The best revenge is living a life so complete, so unapologetically peaceful, that the person who tried to destroy you ends up haunted by how little they mattered in the long run. Brielle had called me once, weeks after the court decision. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail on Neverly. You were part of my good karma streak, she said, laughing. Helping you gave me purpose again. You saved me, I told her. No, she replied. You saved yourself. I just handed you the flashlight. I thought about that for a long time after we hung up. Because she was right. I could have chosen anger. I could have destroyed everything in my path just to feel powerful again. But instead, I chose clarity. I built spreadsheets, not shouting matches. I chose courtrooms, not chaos. I chose dignity when I had every right to explode. And because of that, I didn't just survive the betrayal, I redefined myself through it. Now, when people ask me what happened between us, I don't tell the whole story. I don't list the lies, the expenses, or the beach photos. I just say this. She left thinking she found better. I stayed and found peace. And that's enough, because I don't owe the world an explanation for how I healed. I only owe myself the truth of what I endured and the pride of how I overcame it. So here I am, 39, divorced, rebuilding, and happier than I ever was in that marriage. Some people chase beaches while burning bridges. Me? I've learned to build on solid ground. No more borrowed trust. No more forced smiles. No more fake forever. Just me, my dog, a skyline view, and the quiet certainty that I will never let someone write me out of my own story again. Not even for paradise.
Wenn Katara ins Spiel kommt, lege auf jede andere Kreatur, die du kontrollierst, eine +1/+1 Marke. Und sie hat 2 von 3. Ist auch krass. Ja. Okay. Aber die kannst du ja noch nicht legen. Also die kannst du legen, aber kannst du noch nicht benutzen.
After a bad car accident, I asked my wife to pick me up from the ER. She replied, "Sorry, I'm at lunch with my male best friend. Can't just leave." I texted, "Okay." What the police officer told her when they approached her table at the restaurant changed everything about her dinner with her friend. You know that feeling when you're so close to home, you can practically taste your couch? That's exactly where I was at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that started like any other crappy day in paradise. 14 hours of dealing with overdoses, heart attacks, and one particularly memorable case involving a guy who somehow got his head stuck in a mailbox. Don't ask me how, because even after 12 years as a paramedic, I'm still trying to figure that one out. The rain was coming down like God had a personal vendetta against anyone trying to get home safely. My windshield wipers were doing their best impression of an asthmatic trying to run a marathon, and I was squinting through the streaks thinking about nothing more complicated than a cold beer and maybe catching the tail end of whatever garbage was on late-night TV. Simple pleasures, you know? The kind of stuff you take for granted until life decides to play a little game I like to call, "Let's see how fast we can screw up Marcus's evening." I was maybe 3 blocks from my apartment, close enough that I was already mentally rehearsing my "honey, I'm home" routine for Camille. Though let's be honest, she was probably already asleep with her fancy silk eye mask and those ridiculous earplugs she insisted on wearing because apparently the world was too loud for her delicate sensibilities. But hey, that's marriage, right? You love someone despite their quirks, even when those quirks include treating sleep like it's some kind of sacred ritual that requires more preparation than a NASA launch. The intersection of 5th and Marshall was coming up. You know, that sketchy one where half the streetlights are always busted and the other half flicker like they're auditioning for a horror movie. I slowed down because, call it professional paranoia, but when you've scraped enough people off the pavement, you tend to drive like your grandmother on a Sunday afternoon. The light was green, had been green for a good 10 seconds, so I started rolling through, already thinking about how I was going to explain to Camille why I was late again. That's when I heard it. The sound that every paramedic knows but never wants to hear when they're not on the job. The angry roar of an engine pushed way past its limits, tires screaming against wet asphalt like banshees with a noise complaint. I had maybe half a second to think, oh, this is gonna suck, before the world went completely sideways. The souped-up Honda Civic, and yes, I caught the make and model even as it was busy rearranging my life, came flying through that red light like it was more of a suggestion than an actual traffic law. The kid behind the wheel couldn't have been more than 20, probably hopped up on energy drinks, and that special kind of stupidity that makes you think you're invincible right up until physics decides to teach you otherwise. Impact. That's all I remember for a split second. Pure, concentrated impact that felt like getting hit by a freight train made of spite and poor life choices. My driver's side door caved in like it was made of tinfoil, and suddenly I was intimately acquainted with parts of my car that were never meant to be interior features. Glass exploded everywhere, tiny diamonds of pain that sparkled in the streetlight before gravity pulled them down like the world's most painful snow. The screaming started immediately. Mine, his, and about 3 different car alarms that decided this was the perfect time to remind everyone that they existed. The rain kept falling because apparently, Mother Nature doesn't pause for personal catastrophes, and it mixed with something warm running down my face that I was pretty sure wasn't sweat. My left arm was making a shape that arms definitely aren't supposed to make, bent at an angle that would have been impressive if it weren't attached to me. The pain hit in waves, starting as a dull roar and building to a crescendo that made my teeth ache. My head felt like someone was using it as a bass drum, and when I tried to focus on anything specific, the world kept sliding in and out of focus like a broken camera lens. Then came the darkness. Not the peaceful kind you get when you're falling asleep after a good day, but the heavy, oppressive kind that feels like being buried alive. I could hear voices getting farther away, sirens in the distance getting closer, and the steady patter of rain on metal that sounded like applause for the universe's latest joke at my expense. When I came back to something resembling consciousness, I was staring up at faces I recognized. Jimmy Rodriguez and Sarah Chun from Station 19, 2 of the best paramedics in the city, and people I'd worked alongside more times than I could count. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now on the receiving end of the same professional calm I'd used on countless patients over the years. "Easy there, Marcus," Jimmy was saying, his voice carrying that practiced reassurance we all learned to use when things were bad but not hopeless. "We got you, man. Just stay with us." My vision kept swimming in and out of focus, but I could make out the familiar ritual. The careful extraction, the neck brace, the backboard that always felt like lying on a medieval torture device. Sarah was doing the thing with my arm that I'd done 1,000 times myself. The gentle probing that tells you everything you need to know about how badly you're screwed. Officer Ronan Pierce showed up just as they were loading me into the ambulance. Good old Ronan, who'd been dealing with the aftermath of car crashes almost as long as I'd been patching up the survivors. We'd grabbed beers together, complained about the job, shared the kind of dark humor that keeps you sane when you spend your days cleaning up other people's worst moments. He leaned in close, his face serious in that way cops get when they're about to ask the important questions. "Marcus, buddy, we need to notify someone. You got an emergency contact? Family we should call." Through the haze of pain and whatever lovely cocktails they'd already started pumping into my fore, I managed to croak out the name that should have been the easiest thing in the world to say. My wife. "Camille, please call her." Even through the fog of shock and medication, I remember thinking it was funny how those 3 words, "my wife Camille," suddenly felt heavier than they ever had before. Like I was handing over something precious and hoping it wouldn't get dropped. The ride to St. Jude's emergency room was a blur of flashing lights, radio chatter, and that special kind of professional efficiency that I'd been on the delivering end of more times than I could count. Now that I was the guy strapped to the gurney, getting the full customer experience, I had to admit we made this look way easier than it actually was. Every bump in the road felt like someone was playing xylophone on my ribs, and my left arm was sending up distress signals that would have made the Titanic jealous. Jimmy kept talking to me the whole way. Standard protocol to keep the patient conscious and responsive, though in my case, it was more like keeping me from sliding into the kind of self-pity that comes with realizing you're about to become a statistic in your own field. "Stay with us, Marcus. We're almost there. Sarah's got your vitals looking good, and that arm's gonna heal up just fine. You know the drill." Yeah, I knew the drill all right. I also knew that looking good in paramedic speak usually translated to not actively dying at this very moment, which, considering the circumstances, I was willing to accept as a win. St. Jude's ER on a Tuesday night was exactly what you'd expect. Controlled chaos with a side of fluorescent lighting that made everyone look like extras from a zombie movie. The triage nurse, a battle-hardened woman named Betty who'd been working these halls since before I was old enough to know what a stethoscope was, took one look at me and started the paperwork dance that turns human suffering into billable hours. They got me onto one of those hospital beds that somehow managed to be both too hard and too soft at the same time, and within minutes I was hooked up to more machines than a NASA control room. The pain meds hit my system like a warm wave of artificial happiness, taking the edge off everything and making the world feel like it was wrapped in cotton batting. Dr. Jennifer Walsh showed up looking like she'd been pulled from a medical textbook. Competent, professional, and carrying that particular brand of exhaustion that comes with spending your nights putting people back together. She poked and prodded with the kind of thoroughness that would have been impressive if it weren't happening to me. "Well, Marcus," she said, consulting her clipboard with the satisfied air of someone who just solved a particularly interesting puzzle. "You've got yourself a nice clean break in your left radius. Should heal up just fine with a cast and some patience. The concussion's mild, but we'll want to keep an eye on that. All things considered, you got pretty lucky tonight." Lucky, right. Nothing says lucky like getting T-boned by a kid who probably thought traffic laws were more like traffic suggestions. But I'd seen enough crashes to know she was right. I could have been scraped off the pavement with a spatula, so I guess lucky was relative. That's when the question I'd been dreading finally came up. Betty, the triage nurse, appeared at my bedside with that particular look that nurses get when they're about to deliver news that's going to make your day significantly worse. "Honey," she said, and already I knew this wasn't going to be good because Betty only called people honey when she was about to break bad news gently. "We've been trying to reach your wife like you asked. Called her 3 times now, but she's not picking up." I stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the little holes in the acoustic panels while my brain processed this information. 3 calls. 3 attempts to reach the person who was supposed to be my emergency contact, my ride or die, my better half. The person who should have dropped everything and come running the moment she heard I was hurt. But I already knew where she was, didn't I? Tuesday lunch with Damian Price, her best friend, who had more money than sense and enough fake deep philosophy to choke a horse. Every Tuesday, like clockwork, they'd meet up at some trendy cafe downtown to discuss art and literature and whatever other pretentious garbage trust fund babies talked about when they weren't busy inheriting their way through life. Damian was one of those guys who wore designer jeans to look casual and quoted Nietzsche at dinner parties like he'd personally discovered philosophy. The kind of guy who called himself an entrepreneur but never seemed to actually do any work, unless you counted posting inspirational quotes on Instagram as a legitimate business venture. Camille always insisted he was like a brother to her, which might have been more convincing if brothers typically looked at their sisters the way I'd caught him looking at my wife. But hey, what did I know? I was just the husband who worked 14-hour shifts saving lives while she discussed the deeper meaning of abstract art over $20 salads. The pain meds made my fingers feel like they belonged to someone else, but I managed to fish my phone out of my pocket with my good hand. The screen was cracked, probably happened during my intimate encounter with that Honda Civic, but it still worked well enough to send a text. I typed slowly, each letter a small victory against the fog in my brain. Car accident. I'm at St. Jude's ER. Broken arm. Can you pick me up? I hit send and waited. The little delivered notification popped up immediately, so I knew the message went through. Then came the 3 dots that meant she was typing back, and for a moment I felt this pathetic surge of relief. Maybe she'd panic. Maybe she'd apologize profusely for not answering. Maybe she'd drop everything and rush over like a normal person would when their spouse ended up in the hospital. The response that came back was a masterclass in exactly how not to react when your husband nearly dies in a car crash. "Ugh, Marcus, that sucks. But I'm at lunch with Damian. It's important. Can you get a cab? Let me know how it goes." I read it once, then again, then a 3rd time because surely I was misunderstanding something. Maybe the concussion was affecting my reading comprehension. Maybe the pain meds were making me see things that weren't there. But no, there it was in black and white on my cracked phone screen. Her husband was in the emergency room, and her primary concern was that it might inconvenience her very important lunch date with her very important friend who wore scarves in July and thought having opinions about wine made him interesting. "Ugh, Marcus, that sucks." Like I told her I was stuck in traffic or ran out of milk. "Can you get a cab?" Because nothing says loving spouse support quite like suggesting your injured husband take public transportation home from the hospital. The really beautiful part was, "Let me know how it goes." As if my medical emergency was some kind of minor inconvenience that she'd check in on later when it was more convenient for her social calendar. I stared at that message for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes, feeling something shift inside my chest that had nothing to do with the accident. It was like watching a house of cards collapse in slow motion. Except the house was my marriage, and the cards were all the little compromises and excuses I'd made over the years. Betty came back to check on me. and I could tell from her expression that she'd been hoping for better news about my emergency contact situation. Any luck reaching your wife, honey? I held up my phone, showing her the text exchange. Betty read it, and I watched her professional nurse expression crack just slightly around the edges. Oh, she said, and that one word contained about 17 different kinds of disapproval. I managed what I hoped was a smile, though it probably looked more like a grimace. Yeah. Oh. With my good hand, I slowly typed out a response that would have won awards for understatement. Okay. Just okay. Because really, what else was there to say? My wife had just told me that her lunch plans were more important than her husband's trip to the emergency room. And somehow, lying there in that hospital bed with machines beeping around me and my arm throbbing despite the medication, that one word felt like the most honest thing I'd said in years. You know that moment when you're standing at the edge of a cliff and you realize you have two choices: step back to safety or jump into the unknown. That's exactly where I was, lying in that sterile hospital bed with nothing but the steady beep of machines and the distant sound of other people's emergencies echoing through the halls. The pain meds had kicked in full force by now, wrapping everything in a nice fuzzy blanket of artificial calm, but my mind was crystal clear in a way it hadn't been in years. That text from Camille, all 23 words of pure, concentrated selfishness, had done something to me that no amount of medication could touch. It wasn't just disappointment anymore, though God knows I'd had plenty of practice with that particular emotion over the past few years of our marriage. No, this was something else entirely. This was the sound of the last thread snapping, the final straw breaking the camel's back, the moment when you realize you've been playing a game where only one person knew the rules. I stared at my phone screen until the letters started to blur together, reading that message over and over like maybe if I looked at it enough times, the words would magically rearrange themselves into something that resembled basic human decency. But nope. There it was in all its glory, a perfect little snapshot of exactly how much my wife valued our relationship when it came into conflict with her social calendar. The really beautiful part was how she'd signed off with "let me know how it goes," like she was checking in on a dentist appointment or waiting to hear how a job interview went. Not, "I'm coming right now." Not, "Oh my God, are you okay?" Not even, "I'll be there as soon as I can." Just a casual request for updates when convenient, like I was live tweeting my medical emergency for her entertainment. Betty walked by again, giving me that look that nurses perfect over years of dealing with people at their lowest points. Part sympathy, part professional concern, and part barely concealed judgment about the quality of my life choices. I caught her eye and tried for a smile that probably came out looking more like a grimace. "You hanging in there, honey?" she asked, and I could tell she was thinking about that text exchange she'd witnessed earlier. "Oh, I'm just peachy," I managed, which was about as much sarcasm as I could muster through the pharmaceutical haze. "Living the dream over here." She patted my good arm with the kind of gentle firmness that only comes from years of dealing with people who are having the worst day of their lives. "You need anything? Someone else we can call maybe." That's when the idea hit me. Not like a lightning bolt of inspiration, but more like a slow, warm realization that I actually had options here. See, the thing about being married to someone for 6 years is that you learn their routines, their habits, their little rituals. And Camille's Tuesday lunch with Damien wasn't just any old lunch. It was a production, a carefully orchestrated performance of sophistication and culture that always happened at the same place, at the same time, with the same pretentious attention to detail. The Marlowe Cafe, downtown, where they served $15 avocado toast and called it artisanal, because apparently adding an adjective made it worth 3 times what normal toast should cost. Where Damien would hold forth about whatever book he'd skimmed that week, while Camille hung on his every word like he was dispensing wisdom from on high, instead of just regurgitating shit he'd read on Wikipedia. I knew exactly where she was, and more importantly, I knew she'd be there for at least another hour because Camille never cut these lunches short. They were too important to her self-image, too central to whatever fantasy she'd built about herself as some kind of intellectual socialite who discussed philosophy over wine at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. The pain meds were making me feel loose and reckless in a way that probably should have been a warning sign, but instead felt like permission. Permission to stop being the understanding husband, the guy who made excuses for his wife's behavior, The pushover who accepted, "I'm busy with Damien," as a reasonable response to a medical emergency. I picked up my phone again, scrolling through my contacts until I found Ronan's number. Officer Ronan Pierce, good old reliable Ronan, who'd been dealing with the aftermath of people's bad decisions for almost as long as I'd been patching up the results. We'd grabbed beers together after particularly rough shifts, commiserated about the job, shared the kind of gallows humor that keeps you sane when your daily routine involves cleaning up other people's worst moments. More importantly, Ronan was exactly the kind of by-the-book cop who took emergency notifications seriously. The kind of guy who believed that when someone ended up in the hospital, their emergency contact should actually be contacted, even if it meant interrupting their very important lunch date. My finger hovered over his number for just a moment while the last rational part of my brain tried to talk me out of what I was about to do. This was petty, it whispered. This was vindictive. This was going to cause a scene and embarrass Camille in front of her precious friend and probably end up making things worse between us in the long run. But you know what? That rational voice could go straight to hell, because it had been making excuses for Camille's behavior for years. And where had that gotten me? Lying alone in a hospital bed while my wife prioritized her social life over my well-being. I hit the call button. Ronan picked up on the second ring, his voice carrying that particular blend of authority and concern that cops use when they're not sure if they're about to deal with an emergency or just another routine call. "Pierce here. Marcus? How you holding up, buddy?" "Hey, Ronan," I said, and even through the medication fog, I could hear something different in my own voice, something harder, more resolved. "I'm doing okay, all things considered. But I've got a situation with my emergency contact." "Yeah? What's going on?" I could picture him on the other end of the line, probably sitting in his patrol car or at his desk, already reaching for a pen because Ronan was the kind of cop who took notes about everything. Detail-oriented, thorough, the type of guy who crossed every T and dotted every I because he understood that sometimes the little things mattered more than anyone realized. She didn't answer her phone, I said, which was technically true, just not the whole story. "But I know where she is. The Marlowe Cafe downtown. Table by the window, probably. Maybe you could notify her in person?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could practically hear the wheels turning in Ronan's head. He knew me well enough to know that I wasn't the type to cause drama without a good reason. But he also knew me well enough to sense that there was more to this story than I was letting on. "You sure about this, Marcus?" he asked, and there was something in his tone that suggested he understood exactly what I was asking him to do. "You want us to send officers to notify her at a restaurant?" I closed my eyes, letting the weight of the moment settle around me like a blanket. This was it, the point of no return, the moment when I stopped being the guy who accepted whatever scraps of attention his wife felt like throwing his way and started being the guy who demanded better. "I'm sure," I said, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I actually meant it. "All right then, I'll send a couple officers over. You just focus on getting better, okay? Rest easy, Marcus." I hung up the phone and leaned back against the pillows, closing my eyes and letting a smile spread across my face, the first genuine smile I'd felt in months. Somewhere across town, Camille's very important lunch was about to get a very interesting interruption, and for once in our relationship, she was going to have to deal with the consequences of her choices in front of an audience she actually cared about impressing. The machines kept beeping their steady rhythm, but somehow the sound felt different now, less like a countdown to disaster and more like a metronome keeping time for whatever came next. The Marlowe Cafe was exactly the kind of place that charged $17 for a salad and called it an experience. All exposed brick and Edison bulbs, with mismatched vintage furniture that probably cost more than my monthly car payment, and a menu written in that pretentious font that makes you squint to figure out what the hell you're actually ordering. It was the type of establishment that attracted people who wanted to be seen being cultured, where conversations about sustainability happened over imported water and the waitstaff all looked like they were auditioning for indie films between shifts. Camille and Damien had claimed their usual spot by the floor-to-ceiling windows that faced the street, prime real estate for people watching and, more importantly, for being watched. She was wearing that cream-colored blouse she'd spent way too much money on, the one that made her feel sophisticated and worldly, paired with the gold jewelry that caught the afternoon light just right. Damien was in his standard uniform of artfully distressed jeans and a button-down that probably cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget, his perfectly tousled hair looking like he'd just rolled out of bed if beds came with personal stylists. They looked like a spread from some lifestyle magazine. Two beautiful people having a beautiful conversation in a beautiful space, completely insulated from the harsh realities of the world outside their bubble of privilege and pretension. Camille was laughing at something Damien had said, that musical laugh she used when she wanted to seem charmed and delighted, while he gestured with his wine glass like he was conducting an orchestra of his own brilliance. The other diners were the usual crowd you'd expect at a place like this. Young professionals trying to impress clients, stay-at-home moms treating themselves to an expensive lunch away from the kids, and a few genuine food enthusiasts who didn't mind paying premium prices for what was admittedly pretty decent cuisine. Everyone was absorbed in their own little worlds of conversation and carefully curated experiences, the kind of people who photographed their food before eating it and posted reviews on Yelp that used words like elevated and transcendent. That's when the atmosphere shifted. The front door opened with the little electronic chime that announced new arrivals. But instead of another pair of well-dressed diners or a nervous couple on a first date, two police officers walked in. Not detectives in suits trying to blend in, but full uniform, badge and gun wearing, official business police officers who looked like they meant business and weren't particularly interested in the artisanal bread service. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Conversations didn't just pause, they died mid-sentence, leaving behind the kind of silence that only happens when something completely unexpected crashes into a carefully controlled environment. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. Wine glasses froze in mid-sip, and every head in the place turned toward the door like they were watching a tennis match where the ball had just exploded. Officer Janet Mills led the way, a tall, no-nonsense woman with about 15 years of experience dealing with people on what were usually the worst days of their lives. Her partner, Officer David Chun, followed close behind, both of them scanning the room with the practiced efficiency of cops who knew how to spot what they were looking for in a crowd. Their boots made solid, authoritative sounds against the polished concrete floor, a rhythmic counterpoint to the sudden hush that had fallen over the entire restaurant. They approached Camille's table with the kind of purposeful stride that left no doubt about their destination. Every eye in the place was following their progress, and I could practically feel the collective intake of breath as the other diners realized they were about to witness some kind of drama unfold in real time. Officer Mills stopped directly beside Camille's chair, her presence commanding and impossible to ignore. Damien's fork was still suspended in midair, a piece of arugula dangling from it like a green flag of surrender, while Camille looked up with the kind of confused expression people get when their perfectly ordered world suddenly develops an unexpected crack. "Ma'am," Officer Mills said, her voice carrying clearly across the now silent restaurant. "Are you Camille Lane?" The question hung in the air like smoke, and I could imagine Camille's mind racing to process what was happening. Her name, spoken by a police officer, in front of all these people, in the middle of her very important lunch with her very important friend. The color started draining from her face as the implications began to sink in. "Yes," she managed, her voice smaller than usual, lacking the confident tone she used when discussing art installations or the deeper meaning of whatever pretentious novel Damien had recommended that week. What's wrong?" Officer Mills consulted her notepad with the kind of professional detachment that comes from delivering bad news, so often it becomes routine. "Your husband, Marcus Lane, was involved in a major vehicle accident earlier this afternoon. He was transported by ambulance to St. Jude's Hospital with significant injuries. We've been trying to contact you for over 2 hours. He listed you as his emergency contact." The words hit the restaurant like a physical force. I could imagine the collective gasp from the other diners, the way conversations at nearby tables would resume in urgent whispers, the way people would lean forward slightly to make sure they didn't miss any of this unexpected entertainment. Damien's reaction was particularly satisfying to imagine, his carefully cultivated image of sophisticated worldliness cracking like cheap paint as he realized he was suddenly part of a very real, very serious situation that couldn't be solved with wine pairings or intellectual discussions. His fork finally completed its journey to the table, forgotten as he stared at the officers with the expression of someone who just realized the world contained problems that trust funds couldn't fix. Significant injuries? Camille repeated, and I could picture her voice cracking slightly on the words. The woman who'd texted, "Ugh, that sucks," was now faced with the reality of what that actually meant, delivered by uniformed officers in front of a room full of witnesses who were hanging on every word. Officer Mills continued with the kind of professional thoroughness that Ronan had undoubtedly requested. He suffered a broken arm and concussion when another vehicle ran a red light and struck his car. The accident occurred at approximately 11:47 p.m. He's currently stable at St. Jude's Emergency Department. The silence in the restaurant was so complete you could have heard a pin drop, except for the soft jazz music still playing through the speakers, an absurdly cheerful soundtrack to what was rapidly becoming the most uncomfortable lunch of Camille's life. "We've been attempting to reach you since the accident occurred," Officer Chen added, his tone carrying just a hint of reproach that suggested he'd been briefed on exactly how long they'd been trying to contact the victim's wife. Multiple calls to your listed number went unanswered. I could imagine Camille's phone, sitting silent in her purse while she focused on more important things like Damien's thoughts on postmodern literature or whatever philosophical garbage they'd been discussing while her husband lay bleeding in a hospital bed. "He specifically asked us to notify you in person," Officer Mills concluded, and those words were probably the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard, even though I wasn't there to witness their impact firsthand. The officer's tone was perfectly neutral, completely professional, but somehow managed to carry an undertone that suggested exactly what she thought about a wife who couldn't be reached when her husband was fighting for his life. It was the kind of subtle judgment that only comes from years of dealing with people's priorities and finding them wanting. "You'll also need to coordinate with the towing company regarding personal effects from the vehicle," Officer Chen added, consulting his own notes. "The car was declared a total loss at the scene. Here's the information for the impound lot." He handed her a business card, and I could imagine her taking it with shaking hands, still trying to process the fact that her husband's car, and nearly her husband, had been destroyed while she was discussing the artistic merit of overpriced appetizers. "That's all the information we have at this time, ma'am," Officer Mills said, closing her notepad with a decisive snap that probably echoed through the silent restaurant like a gunshot. "We strongly suggest you proceed to the hospital immediately." And then, with the same professional efficiency they'd used to enter, both officers turned and walked toward the door, their job complete, leaving behind a dining room full of people who'd just witnessed someone's carefully constructed world collapse in real time. I could imagine Camille sitting there in the aftermath, surrounded by the scattered remains of her sophisticated lunch and the weight of dozens of stares from strangers who now knew exactly what kind of person she was. Her perfectly planned afternoon, her important conversation with Damien, her entire self-image as someone who had her priorities straight. All of it reduced to rubble by a simple police notification that she should have received hours ago in the privacy of a phone call. But she'd chosen differently, and now everyone in that restaurant knew it. Back at St. Jude's, I was getting the full VIP treatment. If VIP stood for very injured person instead of very important person. Dr. Walsh had just finished explaining the thrilling details of my medical situation, while a nurse who looked like she could bench press a small car carefully maneuvered my busted arm into what would become my stylish new accessory for the next 6 to 8 weeks. The cast was going to be that lovely hospital beige color that screamed, I made poor life choices. But hey, at least it would match my current mood. The stitches were the fun part. Apparently, when glass decides to redecorate your face, it likes to get creative with the patterns. Nothing too dramatic, just a few artistic slashes that would probably leave me looking like I'd gotten into a fight with a very small, but very determined ninja. The doctor assured me they'd heal up fine and barely leave scars, which was great news for my already devastated modeling career. I was lying there contemplating the acoustic tiles and the ceiling and wondering if there was some kind of cosmic joke being played at my expense when I heard a familiar voice cutting through the usual hospital chaos like a machete through bureaucratic bullshit. Where is he? Where's my idiot brother? Tessa, my younger sister, the human hurricane who could turn a library into a war zone just by walking through the doors. I heard her before I saw her, which was usually the case with Tess. She had a voice that could cut through steel and a personality to match. The sound of her approach was like hearing the cavalry charge, if the cavalry wore designer boots and had a master's degree in corporate warfare. She appeared in my doorway looking exactly like what she was, a successful marketing executive who'd just abandoned whatever important meeting she'd been in to rush to the hospital. Her blonde hair was still perfectly styled despite the obvious speed with which she'd gotten here, and she was wearing one of those power suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Tessa had always been the sibling who landed on her feet, the one who turned every setback into a comeback story and every obstacle into a stepping stone. But right now, she looked like she was ready to burn down half the city to get to whoever had hurt her big brother. Jesus Christ, Marcus, she said, taking in the full scope of my condition with the kind of clinical assessment that came from years of dealing with crisis management in the corporate world. You look like you got hit by a truck. Close. I managed, holding up my phone to show her the text exchange that had become the centerpiece of my evening's entertainment. Honda Civic. But check this out. This is the real injury. Tessa took my phone and read through the messages, her expression shifting from concern to disbelief to what I could only describe as controlled nuclear fury. She read it once, then again, then a third time like she was making absolutely sure she hadn't misunderstood something fundamental about human decency. Are you fucking kidding me? She said, and I was pretty sure the nurse 3 rooms over could hear her. She said, ugh, that sucks about her husband being in a car accident. Don't forget the part where she suggested I take a cab home from the emergency room. I added helpfully. That was my personal favorite touch. Tessa stared at the phone screen for another long moment, and I could practically see the gears turning in her head. My sister didn't just get angry, she got strategic. When Tessa decided someone needed to be dealt with, she approached it like a military campaign, complete with tactical planning and precision execution. Oh, we're done, she said finally, handing me back my phone with the kind of careful control that suggested she was fighting the urge to throw it against the wall. We are so fucking done with this bullshit. I asked, though I had a pretty good idea where this was heading. Marcus, I've been watching you make excuses for that woman for 6 years, Tessa said, pulling up the visitor's chair with more force than strictly necessary. 6 years of watching her treat you like an inconvenience, like some kind of backup plan she keeps around for when her real life gets boring. And now this. She gestured at my cast, my stitched-up face, the general disaster that had become my evening. Your husband is lying in a hospital bed, and her biggest concern is that it might interrupt her lunch date with Captain Trust Fund? No, absolutely not. This ends tonight. The thing about Tessa was that when she made a decision, it wasn't really a suggestion or a proposal. It was more like a natural law that the universe just had to adjust to accommodate. She'd been that way since we were kids, the little sister who somehow ended up being the one calling the shots by sheer force of will and an absolute refusal to accept anything less than what she considered acceptable. I'll take you home, she continued, already pulling out her own phone and scrolling through her contacts like a general reviewing her available troops. But first, we're going to deal with Camille. Permanently. Tess, I started, but she held up a hand that could have stopped traffic. No, she said firmly. No more, but she's my wife, or, but I love her, or any of that bullshit. She just showed you exactly who she is and exactly how much you matter to her. When someone tells you who they are, Marcus, you listen. She was right, of course. Tessa was almost always right about people, which was probably why she'd been so successful climbing the corporate ladder while I'd been content to spend my days patching up other people's mistakes. She had this ability to cut through all the noise and see people for exactly what they were, without the rose-colored glasses that the rest of us use to make reality more palatable. Besides, she added, her voice taking on that particular tone that meant she'd already started planning whatever came next. This isn't just about tonight. This is about all the nights, all the times she's chosen something or someone else over you, all the ways she's made you feel like you should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention she felt like throwing your way. I thought about that for a moment, letting the truth of it settle in my chest next to all the other uncomfortable realizations this night had brought. Tessa wasn't wrong. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was just the most obvious example of a pattern that had been going on for years. All those times Camille had been too busy, too tired, too focused on her own priorities to make space for mine. All those moments when I told myself that this was just how marriage worked, that compromise meant accepting less than what you actually needed. So what are you suggesting? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Tessa's smile was the kind that had probably sent shivers down the spines of countless corporate executives who'd underestimated her over the years. It was the smile of someone who'd just figured out how to solve a problem that everyone else thought was unsolvable. I'm suggesting we clean house, she said, scrolling through her phone with the focused intensity of someone who was already 3 steps ahead of the conversation. I'm suggesting we make sure that when Princess Camille finally decides to grace us with her presence, she finds out exactly what happens when you choose a lunch date over your husband's life. The machines kept beeping their steady rhythm around us, but somehow the sound felt different now, less like medical equipment monitoring a patient and more like a countdown timer marking the end of something that had been broken for longer than I'd been willing to admit. We're going to clear her out of your life, Tessa said with the kind of finality that suggested the decision had already been made and the rest was just logistics. Completely. Permanently. And we're going to do it right. And looking at my sister's face, seeing the determination there that I'd watched her use to bulldoze through every obstacle life had thrown her way, I realized that for the first time in years, I actually believed that things were about to change. The beautiful thing about pain medication is that it doesn't just dull physical pain. It also provides this lovely buffer between you and the emotional train wreck that your life has suddenly become. So when my phone started buzzing like an angry wasp trapped in a jar, I was able to watch the incoming messages from Camille with the kind of detached fascination usually reserved for nature documentaries about predators in their natural habitat. The first text came through while Tessa was still in full battle planning mode, scrolling through her contacts and muttering things that would have made a sailor blush. My phone lit up with Camille's name, and I have to admit, there was a moment where some pathetic part of me thought maybe, just maybe, she was calling to apologize, to explain, to somehow make this whole disaster make sense. I should have known better. I'm on my way. I didn't know it was that serious. That was message number 1, and already I could feel my blood pressure rising despite the pharmaceutical cocktail keeping me artificially calm. She didn't know it was that serious? I'd literally told her I was in the emergency room with a broken arm. What part of emergency room and broken arm suggested a minor inconvenience that could wait until after dessert and coffee? But wait, there was more. Because apparently, when Camille was on a roll, she really committed to the performance. Why didn't you call more than once? And there it was, the classic deflection move that I'd seen her pull countless times over the years. Something goes wrong, and somehow it becomes someone else's fault. Never mind that she'd ignored 3 calls from the hospital while her husband was being cut out of a mangled car. Never mind that any normal human being would have answered their phone when the hospital kept calling. No, the real problem was that I hadn't tried hard enough to reach her. Tessa looked up from her phone when she heard me make that particular sound that's somewhere between a laugh and a growl. What now? She asked, though her expression suggested she already knew this wasn't going to be good news. I showed her the messages, watching her face cycle through the same progression of emotions I'd just experienced: confusion, disbelief, and finally, the kind of cold fury that made me glad we were related instead of enemies. Oh, this bitch has some serious balls, Tessa said, and I was pretty sure the elderly patient in the next bed could hear her through the thin walls. She's actually trying to make this your fault? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed again. Message number 3 in what was rapidly becoming a masterclass in how not to respond when your spouse nearly dies in a car accident. Did you seriously send cops to embarrass me? That was cruel, Marcus. I stared at that message for a long moment, feeling something shift inside my chest that had nothing to do with the accident and everything to do with the slow, dawning realization that I was married to someone who was genuinely, spectacularly selfish. Not just inconsiderate or thoughtless. Actually, fundamentally incapable of seeing beyond her own immediate needs and wants. She was embarrassed. Her husband was lying in a hospital bed, and her primary concern was that she'd been embarrassed in front of her trust fund boyfriend and a restaurant full of strangers who now knew exactly what kind of person she was. The fact that those cops had been sent because she'd ignored multiple calls from the hospital while her husband fought for his life? Totally irrelevant. The real victim here was Camille and her wounded pride. Let me guess, Tessa said, reading over my shoulder. She's mad that you made her look bad? Gets better, I said, because apparently my phone wasn't done delivering this evening's entertainment. Message number 4 arrived like the grand finale of a fireworks show. If fireworks shows were designed to demonstrate the absolute worst of human nature. This is your fault. 3 words. 3 simple, beautiful words that somehow managed to encapsulate everything wrong with my marriage and everything I'd been too stupid or too stubborn to see for the past 6 years. All of this, was my fault. The accident was my fault, presumably because I'd had the audacity to drive home from work. The hospital visit was my fault, probably because I should have been more careful about getting T-boned by teenagers with more horsepower than brain cells. The police notification was my fault, because I should have somehow known that my wife would be too busy discussing postmodern art to answer her phone when the hospital called. Hell, knowing Camille, my broken arm was probably my fault too, because I should have been tougher or more resilient or better at predicting when drunk kids were going to run red lights. Tessa read that last message and went very, very quiet. In my experience, when my sister went quiet, it usually meant someone was about to have a very bad day, and that someone was typically whoever had been stupid enough to piss her off. Marcus, she said, her voice carrying the kind of deadly calm that corporate executives probably heard right before they got fired. I need you to listen to me very carefully. Are you listening? I'm listening, I said, though honestly, the pain meds were making everything feel like it was happening underwater. I want you to block her number. Right now? Before she sends any more of this toxic bullshit your way. I looked down at my phone, at the string of messages that read like a textbook example of emotional manipulation and victim blaming. Part of me, the part that had been making excuses for Camille's behavior for years, wanted to argue. Wanted to say that she was probably just panicked, that people said stupid things when they were scared, that maybe if I just gave her a chance to explain, this would all make sense somehow. But the rest of me, the part that was finally starting to wake up after years of sleepwalking through my own life, knew better. This wasn't panic. This wasn't fear. This was Camille showing me exactly who she was when the chips were down, when something actually mattered, when she had to choose between her own convenience and her husband's well-being. And she'd chosen convenience. She'd chosen Damien and his philosophical bullshit and her precious lunch over the man she'd promised to love and honor and all that other stuff that apparently only applied when it was convenient for her social calendar. You know what? I said, scrolling through my phone's settings with my good hand. You're absolutely right. I found her contact information and hit the magic button that would send any future communications from my loving wife straight into the digital void where they belonged. Block contact. Are you sure? Yes, I was sure. More sure than I'd been about anything in a very long time. The screen confirmed the action with a little notification that somehow felt more satisfying than any of the pain medication they'd been pumping into my system. Camille Lane, contact blocked. 3 beautiful words that felt like the first honest thing that had happened all day. There, I said, showing Tessa the screen. Done. She smiled. Not the corporate shark smile from earlier, but something warmer, prouder. Good. Now, what do you say we make sure she gets the message loud and clear? I looked at my sister, this force of nature who'd dropped everything to rush to my side when I needed her, who'd seen through Camille's bullshit years before I'd been ready to admit it existed, who was now ready to go to war on my behalf without asking for anything in return. What did you have in mind? I asked. Tessa's smile widened, and I realized that blocking Camille's number was just the opening move in whatever game my sister was about to play. And judging by the look in her eyes, it was going to be a game that Camille was completely unprepared for. Oh, Marcus, she said, already dialing someone on her own phone. You're going to love this. We're going to clean house, and we're going to do it right. The thing about Tessa is that when she decides to solve a problem, she doesn't just solve it. She completely annihilates it from existence, and then builds something better in its place. Watching her work was like watching a master craftsman. If master craftsmen specialized in the complete and total dismantling of toxic relationships with military precision and a smile that could cut glass. She'd already been on her phone for 20 minutes, making calls with the efficiency of someone who'd spent years managing corporate crises and hostile takeovers. Each conversation was brief, professional, and absolutely devastating in its implications for anyone who might be on the receiving end of Tessa's particular brand of problem-solving. "Morgan Movers," she said, covering the phone and grinning at me like a cat who'd just figured out how to open the canary cage. They specialize in what they call relationship transition services. Basically, they're the Navy SEALs of breakup logistics. I had to admire the entrepreneurial spirit of whoever had figured out there was money to be made in helping people extract themselves from bad relationships. It was like divorce court, but with better customer service and probably fewer lawyers involved. Though knowing Tessa, she'd probably already thought of that angle too. "Hi, this is Tessa Lane calling for my brother Marcus," she said into the phone, her voice taking on that particular tone she used when she was about to charm someone into doing exactly what she wanted. "We need a complete pack-out and removal service for tomorrow morning. One-bedroom apartment, downtown. Everything belonging to one specific person needs to be boxed, labeled, and ready for pickup." She paused, listening to whoever was on the other end, probably some poor customer service rep who had no idea they were about to become part of Tessa's campaign to reshape my entire life. "No, he won't be present during the packing," she continued, and I could practically hear the satisfaction in her voice. "We'll provide a detailed list of items and photographs for identification." Yes, this is a standard relationship dissolution. Very standard. The way she said "very standard" made it sound like failed marriages were just another item on her to-do list, somewhere between quarterly budget reviews and strategic planning meetings. Which, knowing my sister, they probably were. While she handled the logistics of Operation Remove Camille from my life, I found myself thinking about all the stuff that was scattered around my apartment. 6 years of accumulated couple debris. Her expensive skincare products taking up half the bathroom counter. Her collection of scented candles that apparently served some mysterious purpose beyond making the place smell like a Yankee Candle store had exploded. And that god-awful modern art piece she'd insisted on hanging in the living room that looked like someone had sneezed paint onto a canvas and called it evocative. The clothes alone would probably take hours to sort through. Camille had this thing about designer labels and investment pieces that cost more than my monthly salary. Her closet looked like a boutique that catered exclusively to people who thought spending $300 on a t-shirt was a reasonable life choice. Not that I was bitter or anything. "Excellent," Tessa was saying, apparently having worked out whatever details needed working out. "We'll need everything boxed, labeled, and staged in the living room by noon tomorrow. Clean, professional, no damage to any items. This is about boundaries, not revenge." She hung up and immediately started dialing another number, because apparently we were just getting started with the wholesale reorganization of my personal life. "Loctite Locksmiths," she announced, giving me a thumbs up like she'd just scored the winning goal in whatever game we were playing. Can't have Princess Camille letting herself back in whenever she feels like it. The locksmith conversation was even shorter than the moving company call, probably because changing locks was significantly less complicated than coordinating the complete removal of someone's entire existence from an apartment. Though in Tessa's hands, both seemed to be getting handled with the same ruthless efficiency. "Tomorrow at 8 a.m., she said after hanging up. "New locks, new keys, and a security system upgrade, because why not go all the way, right?" I had to laugh at that, despite everything. My sister didn't just solve problems. She oversolved them, adding features and benefits that you didn't even know you needed until she pointed them out. It was probably why she'd been so successful in the corporate world, where the ability to anticipate problems 3 steps ahead was worth its weight in quarterly bonuses. "Now comes the fun part," she said, cracking her knuckles like a pianist preparing for a complicated concerto. The official notification. She opened her laptop, because of course Tessa traveled with a laptop, probably had a full mobile office setup in whatever ridiculously expensive car she'd driven over here, and started typing with the kind of focused intensity that usually preceded corporate bloodbaths. "What are you writing?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew this wasn't going to be your typical "it's not you, it's me" breakup email. "A masterpiece," she said without looking up from the screen. "Professional, clear, legally sound, and absolutely devastating in its politeness." I watched her type, occasionally pausing to consider word choices or restructure sentences. crafting what I could only assume was going to be the most politely brutal eviction notice in the history of failed relationships. Every few seconds, she'd smile to herself, apparently pleased with whatever literary devastation she was creating. "Read this," she said finally, turning the laptop toward me. Subject: Retrieval of personal property, ***. From Tessa Lane, ***. Camille, your relationship and residence with Marcus Lane have been terminated effective immediately. Following your response to his medical emergency this afternoon, it has become clear that this living arrangement is no longer sustainable or appropriate. Your personal belongings have been professionally packed and inventoried by Morgan Movers and are ready for retrieval. You have 48 hours from the time of this email to coordinate pickup with the moving company. Their contact information is attached. Please note that the locks have been changed as a security precaution. Any future access to the property will require advance coordination through the moving company or legal counsel. Any attempt to contact Marcus directly will be considered harassment and will be documented accordingly. All future communication regarding this matter should be directed through my office. Tessa Lane, on behalf of Marcus Lane. I read it twice, marveling at how Tessa had managed to make a breakup sound like a corporate merger gone wrong. It was polite, professional, and absolutely devastating in its complete lack of emotion or room for negotiation. There was no "let's talk about this," or "maybe we can work things out," just cold, hard logistics and a clear timeline for removing yourself from someone's life. "Jesus, Tess," I said, genuinely impressed. "This reads like you're terminating a business contract." "Because that's exactly what I'm doing," she replied, already moving the cursor to the send button. "Camille treated your marriage like a business arrangement where she got all the benefits and none of the responsibilities. So now she gets to experience the business end of that arrangement." The email disappeared with a soft whoosh, carrying with it the official end of my 6-year marriage and the beginning of whatever came next. I watched the sent confirmation appear on the screen and felt something shift in my chest. Not sadness, exactly, but more like relief. Like I'd been holding my breath for years and was finally allowed to exhale. "There," Tessa said, closing the laptop with a decisive snap. "Clean, professional, and completely final. By Thursday morning, it'll be like she was never there." I looked around the hospital room, at the machines beeping steadily beside my bed, at my sister who dropped everything to come wage war on my behalf, at the cast on my arm that was somehow the least broken thing about my life right now. "You know what the weird part is?" I said. "What's that?" For the first time in years, I actually feel like I can breathe. That night, after Tessa had finally gone home with promises to check on me first thing in the morning and threats to personally hunt down anyone who gave me grief about my situation, I was lying in my own bed for the first time in what felt like a decade. The apartment was weird without Camille's presence. Not emptier exactly. More like when you finally turn off a TV that's been playing background noise for so long you forgot it was there. The silence wasn't lonely, it was peaceful. The pain meds were wearing off enough that I could think clearly, but not so much that my arm felt like it was trying to secede from the rest of my body. I was scrolling through Netflix with my good hand, looking for something mindless to fall asleep to, when my phone buzzed with a notification that made me do a double take. Instagram message request. From Damian Price. I stared at the notification for a solid 30 seconds, trying to process what possible reason Captain Trust Fund could have for sliding into my DMs. This was the same guy who'd been having his very important lunch with my wife while I was bleeding in a hospital bed. The same guy who probably thought emergency contact was something you called when you ran out of champagne at a dinner party. Curiosity won out over common sense, a pattern that had gotten me into trouble before, but never quite like this. I opened the message, not sure if I was about to read an apology, a confession, or just more evidence that the entire universe had lost its collective mind. "Hey man, I didn't know about your accident. When the cops came, I was shocked. I asked Camille why she hadn't left earlier. She just shrugged. That's not the kind of person I want in my life. I'm sorry for being part of this mess. Hope you recover fast." I read it once, then again, then a third time because apparently this night was just going to keep delivering surprises until my brain completely gave up trying to process them. Damian Price. The guy I'd spent years assuming was trying to steal my wife. the trust fund philosopher who quoted dead Germans at dinner parties and wore scarves in July, was apologizing to me. And not just apologizing, but essentially confirming that Camille was exactly as awful as her behavior suggested. The really fascinating part was that detail about him asking why she hadn't left earlier and her response being a shrug. A fucking shrug. Her husband was in the hospital, and when her supposed best friend suggested maybe she should go check on him, she shrugged like he'd asked her opinion about the weather. I could picture the scene. Damien probably doing that thing rich people do when they're confronted with actual human suffering. That uncomfortable shifting around while they try to figure out how to respond appropriately. And Camille, faced with the choice between appearing caring and admitting that she'd rather finish her meal than deal with her husband's medical emergency, just shrugged. It was almost impressive in its complete lack of self-awareness. Most people, when caught being heartless in front of witnesses, at least had the decency to pretend they cared. But not Camille. She was apparently so committed to her own priorities that she couldn't even fake concern when social pressure demanded it. The fact that Damien, Mr. Pretentious Philosophy himself, was horrified enough by her reaction to reach out to me spoke volumes about just how badly she'd handled the situation. This was a guy who probably thought empathy was a wine varietal. And even he could see that something was fundamentally wrong with a woman who couldn't be bothered to show concern for her injured spouse. That's not the kind of person I want in my life. Coming from Damien, that was practically a character assassination. He was essentially saying that Camille had failed some basic test of human decency so spectacularly that even someone who spent his days discussing the deeper meaning of abstract art couldn't overlook it. I found myself laughing. Not the bitter, angry kind of laugh I'd been doing all day, but something closer to genuine amusement. The irony was just too perfect. I'd spent years being jealous of Damien, worried that he was going to steal my wife away with his sophisticated conversation and his designer lifestyle. Turns out, he had better judgment about people than I did. The message was weak, sure. It was the kind of apology that rich people give when they want to distance themselves from someone else's bad behavior without actually taking any real responsibility. But it was also revealing in ways that Damien probably didn't realize. He'd been there. He'd seen Camille's reaction firsthand. And whatever he'd witnessed had been so off-putting that he'd felt compelled to reach out to the husband he barely knew to essentially say, "Holy shit, your wife is terrible, and I want no part of this." More importantly, it meant that Camille hadn't just lost her husband tonight. She'd also lost her backup plan, her safety net, her best friend, who'd been providing her with the intellectual stimulation and sophisticated companionship that apparently I was too blue-collar to offer. Damien Price, with his trust fund and his philosophical pretensions and his carefully curated lifestyle, had looked at Camille's behavior and decided she wasn't worth keeping around. The guy who probably had women throwing themselves at him left, and right had seen enough of my wife's true character in one afternoon to know he wanted nothing to do with her. That was the most damning indictment of all. Not the blocked phone calls, not the dismissive text messages, not even the shrug when asked why she wasn't rushing to her husband's bedside. The real truth about Camille was that even the people she thought were her allies, the ones she'd prioritized over her marriage, found her behavior unacceptable when it really mattered. I thought about responding to Damien's message, maybe thanking him for the information or asking for more details about exactly what had happened at that restaurant. But honestly, what was the point? The damage was done, the truth was out, and adding more drama to this shit show wasn't going to change anything. Instead, I just deleted the message request and went back to browsing Netflix. Damien could keep his weak apology and his guilty conscience. I had more important things to think about, like what I was going to do with all the extra closet space I was about to have. The apartment felt different now, not just quiet, but somehow cleaner. Like someone had opened all the windows and let out years of accumulated toxicity. Tomorrow, Morgan movers would come and physically remove the last traces of Camille from my space. But tonight, just knowing that even her precious Damien had seen through her bullshit was enough. I settled on some mindless action movie and closed my eyes, my phone silent beside me for the first time in longer than I could remember. No more texts from Camille. No more guilt trips or blame games or carefully worded manipulations designed to make me question my own judgment. Just silence and the steady sound of my own breathing and the comfortable weight of knowing that sometimes the trash takes itself out. The next morning came with the kind of efficiency that only happens when Tessa is running the show. By 8 a.m. sharp, Loctite locksmiths had already come and gone, leaving me with a set of shiny new keys and the satisfying knowledge that my apartment was now officially a Camille-free zone. The security system upgrade was overkill, but I had to admit there was something deeply satisfying about having a digital fortress protecting my newfound peace of mind. Morgan movers arrived at exactly 9 a.m. with the kind of professional cheerfulness that suggested they'd done this dance many times before. The team leader, a compact woman named Rosa who looked like she could bench press a piano, took one look around my apartment and nodded with the satisfaction of someone who'd seen it all and wasn't impressed by any of it. "Standard relationship dissolution," she said, consulting her tablet like she was reading a grocery list. "We've got the inventory list your sister provided, photos for identification, and instructions to treat everything with care regardless of personal feelings about the situation." I had to respect the professionalism. These people had turned heartbreak into a business model, and judging by their efficiency, business was probably pretty good. Rosa and her team moved through my apartment like surgical technicians, carefully identifying and boxing everything that belonged to Camille with the kind of methodical precision that would have impressed an accountant. Watching strangers pack up 6 years of someone else's life was surreal in a way that I hadn't expected. They handled Camille's expensive skincare products like they were defusing bombs, wrapped her designer clothes in tissue paper like they were museum artifacts, and carefully bubble-wrapped that god-awful modern art piece that had been haunting my living room wall for the past 3 years. "This piece here," Rosa said, gesturing at the painting that looked like someone had sneezed rainbow colors onto a canvas. "The notes say it's valued at $15,000. "That's what she paid for it," I confirmed, trying not to sound bitter about the fact that my wife had spent more on one piece of abstract nonsense than I made in 2 months. "It's supposed to represent the fluidity of emotional expression or some shit like that." Rosa nodded with the kind of professional neutrality that suggested she'd heard worse explanations for expensive art. "We'll treat it accordingly," she said, which I assumed meant they'd wrap it up carefully instead of using it as a frisbee, though honestly, either option would have been fine with me. The whole process took about 3 hours, during which time my apartment was gradually transformed from the cluttered shrine to someone else's taste into something that actually looked like a place where I might want to live. It was amazing how much space opened up once you removed all the unnecessary shit that someone else had insisted was essential for proper living. The scented candles alone filled 2 entire boxes, which raised the question of exactly how many different ways a person needed their living space to smell like a Bath and Body Works had exploded. Her shoe collection required its own dedicated moving cart, because apparently you needed 47 pairs of shoes to properly express your personality, even if 30 of them were identical black heels in slightly different shades. By noon, everything was boxed, labeled, and stacked in my living room like the world's most depressing game of Tetris. Rosa handed me a detailed inventory list and a receipt, her expression suggesting this was just another Tuesday in the relationship cleanup business. "Your sister arranged for storage if pickup doesn't happen within the 48-hour window," she said, checking something off on her tablet. "After that, it's not your problem anymore. Not my problem anymore." For words that somehow managed to capture the entire spirit of this whole operation. For 6 years, Camille's problems had been my problems. Her priorities had dictated my schedule. Her moods had determined the atmosphere of my home. And now, with the stroke of a pen and the efficiency of professional movers, none of that was my problem anymore. I was admiring the newly spacious living room when the buzzer rang at exactly 2:17 p.m. The security camera showed a sleek black Mercedes parked outside, the kind of car that screamed, "I have money and I want everyone to know it." Camille's father's car. Mr. Howard Blythe stepped out of the driver's seat looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Howard was old-school corporate elite, the kind of guy who wore 3-piece suits to barbecues and thought casual Friday meant removing his cufflinks. He'd always been polite to me in that stiff, formal way that rich people use when they're talking to someone they consider beneath their social station but can't quite dismiss entirely. For 6 years, he'd called me the steady rock whenever anyone asked about his daughter's husband. Not Marcus or my son-in-law, but the steady rock. like I was some kind of geological formation that existed primarily to provide stability for his precious daughter's more interesting life. It was a backhanded compliment wrapped in the kind of condescending approval that rich people mistake for genuine affection. Camille got out of the passenger's side, and I had to admit she looked like hell. Her perfectly styled hair was disheveled, her usually flawless makeup was smudged around the edges, and she was wearing yesterday's clothes like she'd slept in them. Which, knowing Camille's obsession with her appearance, meant she was either having a complete breakdown or had completely given up pretending she had her shit together. She didn't look up at the security camera, didn't try to ring the buzzer, didn't make any attempt to communicate. Just stood there staring at the building like it was some kind of fortress that had suddenly become impenetrable, which I guess it had. Through the intercom, I could hear Howard talking to someone, probably coordinating with the moving company on his phone, because even in family crisis mode, he was still the kind of guy who delegated everything to other people. Camille stood next to him like a ghost of herself, and for just a moment, I felt something that might have been pity. But then I remembered her text messages from yesterday, her shrug when Damien suggested she should check on her injured husband, the casual way she'd suggested I take a cab home from the emergency room. The pity evaporated pretty quickly after that. The movers worked with the same professional efficiency they'd shown earlier, loading box after box into the Mercedes with the kind of careful attention that suggested Howard was paying them well to make this as painless as possible. Camille supervised the process with the vacant expression of someone who was watching their entire life get packed into cardboard containers, but she never once looked up at my windows. The whole thing took maybe 20 minutes. 20 minutes to remove 6 years of accumulated relationship debris, to pack up the physical evidence that we'd ever shared a life together, to reduce our entire marriage to a stack of boxes that could fit in the back of a luxury sedan. When they were done, Howard approached the intercom one final time. His voice crackled through the speaker with the formal politeness of someone conducting a business transaction. "Marcus, if you're listening, the items have been retrieved. Camille wanted me to tell you." He paused, and I could imagine him looking at his daughter, waiting for her to provide some final message, some last attempt at explanation or reconciliation. The silence stretched out for almost a full minute before he cleared his throat and continued. "She wanted me to tell you that she left the spare key on your kitchen counter yesterday. That was it. No apology, no explanation, no attempt to salvage anything from the wreckage of our relationship. Just a practical note about key return, delivered through her father like she was a teenager who couldn't be trusted to handle her own affairs." I watched through the window as they got back into the Mercedes and drove away, taking with them the last physical traces of Camille from my life. The car disappeared around the corner, and just like that, it was over. I walked back into my living room and looked around at the space that was now completely, undeniably mine. No designer throw pillows positioned at precise angles, no expensive candles cluttering every surface, no abstract art demanding attention from the walls. Just clean, empty space that I could fill with whatever the hell I wanted. I sat down on my couch, which was apparently mine now, since Camille hadn't tried to claim it, and took a deep breath. The apartment smelled different already, less like a showroom and more like a place where someone actually lived. For the first time in years, the silence in my apartment wasn't uncomfortable. It wasn't lonely or oppressive or filled with the weight of unspoken resentments. It was just quiet, peaceful, full of possibility. I closed my eyes and smiled. Finally, peace. 7 months later, and I'm sitting in the same apartment that used to feel like a museum dedicated to someone else's taste, except now it actually looks like a place where I live. The walls have my pictures on them, shots from work, a few landscapes I took on weekend trips, even that ridiculous photo of me and my paramedic crew after we won the department's chili cook-off. Real life, not the sanitized perfection that Camille had insisted on maintaining. My arm healed up perfectly, just like Dr. Walsh said it would. The scars on my face faded to thin silver lines that most people don't even notice unless I point them out. But the real healing, the stuff that doesn't show up on x-rays, that took a little longer. Turns out, when you spend 6 years accepting less than you deserve, it takes some time to remember what you're actually worth. Work's been good. Better than good, actually. Without the constant background stress of managing someone else's emotional needs and social calendar, I've been able to focus on what I'm actually good at. Last month, I got a commendation for handling a multi-car pileup that could have been a complete disaster. Funny how much better you perform when you're not wondering if your spouse will be annoyed that you're working late again. Tessa still checks in regularly, though she's dialed back the protective sister routine. Now that she's satisfied, I'm not going to backslide into making excuses for toxic behavior. She was right about everything, of course, but she's gracious enough not to say, "I told you so," more than once a week. About 3 months ago, Camille tried reaching out. One long, exhausting email that somehow managed to hit every manipulation technique in the handbook. She was sorry. She panicked. She didn't realize how serious the accident was. Damien had pressured her to stay at lunch, blah blah blah. The greatest hits of someone who'd finally figured out that actions have consequences, but still couldn't quite grasp the concept of personal responsibility. The email ended with the predictable plea, "I miss our life. I want it back. Please think about it." I read it exactly once, then did something that would have seemed impossible 6 months earlier. I didn't respond. Not with anger, not with explanations, not with a detailed breakdown of exactly why she was wrong about everything. I just didn't respond at all. Instead, I set up an email filter that sends anything from her address straight to the trash folder, where it belongs with the rest of the garbage I don't need cluttering up my life. The thing about revenge is that most people think it involves dramatic confrontations and elaborate schemes designed to make the other person suffer. But real revenge, the kind that actually matters, is so much simpler than that. It's silence. It's boundaries. It's waking up in a space where no one treats you like their backup plan. Camille chose rose and risotto over her husband lying in a hospital bed. She chose her social calendar over basic human decency, her trust fund philosopher over the man who'd spent 6 years trying to make her happy. Those were her choices, and now she gets to live with the consequences of them. I chose differently. I chose peace over drama, self-respect over settlement, silence over endless explanations that would never be enough anyway. The apartment is quiet these days, but it's a good kind of quiet. The kind that comes from knowing you don't have to walk on eggshells or manage someone else's moods or pretend that selfish behavior is just a quirky personality trait. I wake up when I want to wake up, eat what I want to eat, watch whatever garbage I feel like watching on TV without having to endure commentary about how my entertainment choices reflect poorly on my intellectual development. Sometimes I run into people who knew us as a couple, and they ask about Camille with that careful tone people use when they're fishing for gossip. I just tell them we're not together anymore and change the subject. No drama, no detailed explanations, no bitter rants about her character flaws. Just a simple statement of fact and a firm redirect to literally anything else. I erased her from my story completely, and I'm writing a better one now. One where the protagonist doesn't accept crumbs and call it a feast, where the hero actually values himself enough to demand better treatment, where the ending involves peace instead of chaos. It's a good story, and for the first time in years, I'm looking forward to seeing how it turns out.